October 10th, Naruto, Konohagakure 9 years after the Nine-Tails attack. Konoha was in celebration. This was all except for one kid. This was a raven-haired, red-eyed child. This was Naruto. He knew this day would never be good for him. As he remembered, after celebrations, a mob of angry civilians would go out and try to hurt him. They would call him a demon or blame him for their dead families. Naruto saw the mob had begun to form. He ran between the houses. Naruto was trying to make it to the outskirts of the village. Naruto thought, maybe if I make it to the weird temple, no one will see me. No one ever goes there. This plan had seemed to be working when a civilian with dark purple hair pointed at him and yelled, "There is the demon. Let's get him." Naruto then began to speed up and go towards the abandoned Uchiha compound. The villagers began to throw rocks at him, one bruising his leg. However, as Naruto got into the compound, few followed him into the compound. The few that did began to get closer, trying to grab his shirt, causing it to rip. They, however, abandoned the chase. Naruto then went into the compound he had planned to earlier. Naruto entered the abandoned temple. Naruto looked around and saw a few dusty old scrolls which seemed to have something on ceiling. Naruto decided to go farther into the temple. Naruto saw a room full of masks. There was a room full of them. Each seemed to be hand-carved with an intricate design. The room had walls that didn't have masks and had banners of a whirlpool. However, these banners looked poorly maintained. Naruto was bored and decided to play with one of the masks and put it on. After he did that, he appeared to be transported to a new area. It looked like a forest. Naruto looked in front of him and saw a man with Uchiha garb and black hair standing in front of him. The man opened his eyes and began to glare at Naruto. Naruto was scared by this and said, "Who are you, and how did I get him?" The man then looked at him and said, "I am Izuna Uchiha and the second son of the head of the Uchiha family. Where are you from?" Naruto then said, "Well, I don't think I've heard of you. I am from Konoha." Izuna then thought, "I don't believe there is a place with that name unless I died." Izuna then said, "What do you know about the place you live, and also what is the status of the Uchiha clan, and what did you do before you got here?" Naruto then jumped up and said, "Konoha was founded by the Senju and Uchiha clans. The Uchiha clan appears to be mostly destroyed by Itachi Uchiha, and right before I saw you I put on some weird mask in some temple." Izuna thought in response to this, nearly the entire clan gone. How could this happen? Izuna then said, You said right before you came here you put on a mask. I heard that the Uzumaki clan made a mask that could contact the dead of a person's family. Judging by your age, you must be my grandson." Naruto stepped back and said, "Wait, I am your grandson." Naruto then smiled and asked Izuna, "So I guess that means I am an Uchiha. Hey, do you know anything about my parents, your child?" Izuna then said, "I don't know anything about your father, however. I know my wife had a child, a girl, and they were of the Uzumaki clan." Naruto then said, "Wait, you keep saying stuff about the Uzumaki clan, but who are they?" Izuna sighed and said, "They must not teach you anything wherever you are being taught. The Uzumaki clan is a clan known for sealing jutsu and large chakra reserves and being able to create chains out of their chakra. You get those red eyes from them." Naruto then said, "Well, I guess then I better train hard if I am going to live up to this legacy." Izuna then told Naruto as he took the mask off, "Naruto, protect all those of our clan." Madara Uchiha Hidden Hideout. Madara was a husk of the man he once was. He was frail and couldn't leave the one room, needing a flow of Zetsu cells to even live. He couldn't even see as Obito took his Rinnegan to begin the infinite Tsukuyomi plan. Madara was interrupted by his thoughts by a white Zetsu clone. The Zetsu clone said, "Madara, I have completed the investigation you asked for. And the answer is it is true. Naruto is the descendant of the Izuna Uchiha." Madara smiled at this news. He felt some sort of happiness as he now knew his beloved brother had a child, and he did in fact have a family. Matter said to the Zetsu clone, "Sadly, I will never be able to meet Naruto as I am trapped here. However, I want my last order to you to be you must watch and observe him. You may only interfere with his life if he is going to die. This will be your mission until he has matured, and after that point, your mission will be to assist him in his endeavors." The Zetsu clone then smiled and said, "Yes, Lord Madara, I will follow your final order." The Zetsu then left the hideout. After this, Madara took his final breaths and passed on. Jiraiya, Konohagakure. Jiraiya returned to the village. This wasn't for one of the debriefings to do with intelligence. This had to do with the disappearance of Naruto. It was on his birthday and a mob had tried to attack Naruto and had run into a shrine outside the village. Jiraiya went to the aforementioned temple that Naruto was supposedly in. As Jiraiya approached it, he realized it was the Uzumaki Temple, a temple constructed during the time of Uzumaki when they were trying to improve ties between the two villages, also being the clan of his mother. Jiraiya went through the dusty halls and saw a raven-haired child with red eyes. It was Naruto, who had seemed to be waking up. Jiraiya asked Naruto, "Hello Naruto, I am Jiraiya. Now what are you doing in this old temple?" Naruto then looked up at the white-haired man and asked, "Hey, how do you know my name?" Jiraiya then chuckled and said, "Well, that is because I am your godfather. Now would you like to get something to eat?" Naruto nodded in response and took Jiraiya's hand as they left the temple. Jiraiya took Naruto to Ichiraka's ramen. As they were eating, Naruto asked Jiraiya, "So, if you are my godfather, why haven't you been with me?" Jiraiya then gave a sigh and said, "Well, that is because I have to do a very important job for the Leaf, however. I promise whenever I return to the village I will check up on you." Naruto then smiled and said, "Well, okay. If it's so important, I guess I can forgive you." Jiraiya then scuffled the boy's hair and said, "Hey, how about I teach you a jutsu, would you like that?" Naruto then smiled and nodded. The two of them, after finishing their meal, went to an open field and Jiraiya asked Naruto, "So before I teach you anything, can you tell me what has the academy taught you?" Naruto then said, "Well, they taught the body replacement and the transformation, however, I have had trouble with the clone jutsu." Jiraiya then nodded and said, "Well, if you are having trouble with the clone jutsu, I have another jutsu. I can teach you the shadow clone jutsu." Jiraiya then demonstrated creating 2 solid clones. Naruto was amazed by this. Jiraiya then explained, "To do this, unlike a clone jutsu, you have to put as much of your chakra into these clones." Naruto nodded and then made the hand sign and 5 clones were created. Jiraiya smiled and said, "Good. Now I have to go to the Hokage. Now make sure to practice and you can achieve whatever you try to." Jiraiya then disappeared with a body flicker. Naruto thought, man, he better teach me that soon enough. Konoha Library. Naruto Uchiha. Naruto decided to look at the Konoha Library and learn more about his clans and jutsu. Naruto went to the section of Kenjutsu, and as he was leaving he bumped into someone and fell, dropping his books. Naruto looked up to see a young woman with long purple hair. Naruto then said, "I am sorry I didn't see you there." The woman then smiled at Naruto and told him, "It's okay. You don't need to apologize, I should have seen you. The name is Yugao, by the way." Naruto smiled and said, "Yeah, well, I am Naruto Uzumaki, and I am going to become a great shinobi." Yugao then asked Naruto, "So Naruto, why do you want to become a shinobi?" Naruto answered in a calm and serious tone, "If I become a great shinobi, I will be able to protect everyone, and if I do that, everyone will be forced to respect me. Well, one day I want to become Hokage." Yugao then gave a small smile and said, "Well, Naruto, if you want to become a great shinobi, I would suggest studying Kenjutsu. Even if you don't specialize in it, you will probably face people who do, so you should know it enough to counter them." Yugao then handed him a book on Kenjutsu for beginners. Naruto took the book and said, "Thank you, Yugao. Anyway, I should be on my way." Naruto then left to go to his home. On the way, Naruto heard villagers whispering about him. They said all sorts of things like, "So he did live," or, "I wish those people did a better job so we wouldn't have to deal with him." Naruto tried to block those voices out, thinking, "I'll prove them all wrong one day." One thing did confuse Naruto. He thought someone was following him. Naruto thought, maybe it's my imagination. I will take a longer route home. If this person is still following me, I will confront them. Naruto did so, and the person was... Naruto then stopped walking and went to where he felt the presence. Naruto looked around and saw a young girl around his age, the young Hyuga heir Hinata Hyuga. Naruto was surprised, asking her, "Hinata, why are you following me?" The young girl then blushed and said, "WL Naruto, I had heard why you had returned, and I was worried about why you." Naruto then gave a small chuckle and said, well, it's nice, at least someone cares for me. Anyway, if you want to talk to me, just go to me. You don't have to hide. Naruto then left to go home. Near Naruto's home, White Zetsu. White Zetsu looked into the village. Seeing into the large expanses of the village, White Zetsu saw as he went to the apartment Naruto was staying in, and there were Umbu watching the home. White Zetsu saw some. Appeared as if they were more hidden than the others. White Zetsu knew he was not a very strong fighter, so he decided to take on the weakest of this more secretive group. White Zetsu went towards that Umbu. He transformed his arm into a blade and sliced towards the Umbu. However, the Umbu moved out of the way. The Umbu then, in a voice that showed his age, said, who are you and how have you entered my village? White Zetsu smiled and said, well, I am not supposed to tell you, but since you're going to die, I guess I can tell you. Master Madara told me to protect this boy, and you are a threat to that. White Zetsu then laughed as he swung at the Umbu member. The man said, I knew there was something wrong with this boy. I've been serving this village since Tobirama was Hokage. I won't let any minion of Madara defeat me. However, the old Umbu member was unable to keep his word as his age hindered him, and that allowed White Zetsu to slice through the old man. White Zetsu said as he dragged the old man away, man, I am going to have to find a place to hide this. No matter, I must do all to fulfill Lord Madara's final order. Naruto, Shinobi Academy Konoha. Naruto entered the academy after being missing for about a week. As Naruto entered, he felt a small amount of tension in the room as he entered. Kiba yelled at Naruto, hey Naruto, what happened to you? You know if you're going to ever be a shinobi if you skip school. Naruto then looked at him and said, well, Kiba, to become a shinobi all I have to do is be better than you. Well, that can't be too hard. Naruto ignored Kiba yelling at him and walked towards Sasuke and sat next to him. Before anyone could talk, Irika signaled that class was beginning. Later during lunch, Naruto went to sit with Hinata. Naruto sat next to her and said, hey Hinata, can I sit next to you or is this seat taken? Hinata the surprised answered, and no Naruto, this seat isn't taken. After she said this, Naruto sat down and said, thank you Hinata. Hinata blushing asked Naruto, F for W and Naruto. Naruto then smiled and said, well Hinata, you said you missed me. It was nice to know someone cared for me. Hinata, now thoroughly blushing, said, WL, you're welcome. And Naruto then said to Hinata, hey Hinata, you seem to be having trouble with taijutsu. After the academy, would you like me to help you? Hinata then smiled and said, why yes, I would like that. Naruto, after the academy day ended, went towards Sasuke and asked him, so Sasuke, how good of a shinobi do you think you are? Sasuke then glared at Naruto and said, I am the best in our class, so I would say pretty good. Naruto then asked him, so do you know what your nature is? Sasuke then asked, my nature? No, I haven't. Don't you usually do that when you graduate? Naruto smiled and said, well, why wait? You won't ever be able to avenge your clan if you wait. Sasuke gave a small amount of killer intent with the mention of clan. Then, to his surprise, Naruto gave him a slip of paper. Sasuke asked Naruto, what do you want me to do with this? Naruto sighed and said, put some chakra into it. It will reveal what nature you are best at. Sasuke then, partially out of curiosity, did it. The paper crumpled and then caught in fire. Naruto laughed and said, well, you seem to have a primary lightning nature and a secondary in fire. Well, I got wind with a secondary in fire. This means lightning will be easier for you. Sasuke was confused why Naruto was being so nice to him. He asked, Naruto, why are you being so nice to me? Naruto chuckled and said, well, you're always so cocky, and I thought if you're going to be that way, you should be able to back up that talk. After saying this, Naruto quickly left. Hinata Hyuga, outside Senju Park. Hinata waited for Naruto in the place she had been told to by Naruto for almost 10 minutes. She was almost ready to leave when that raven-haired boy came running there. When Naruto got there, he said, sorry I took so long. I had to tell Sasuke something before I came here. Hinata told Naruto, oh no, it's okay, I am glad you came. So what did you want to help me with? Naruto smiled and said, well, you are a Hyuga, right? So I am guessing you've been training with the gentle fist, correct? Hinata nodded in response to this, and Naruto said, well, I was taught this jutsu, the shadow clone. Naruto then demonstrated the jutsu, creating a clone of himself. Naruto then said, well, the shadow clone, unlike the jutsu we are taught in the academy, this clone is physical and can only be dissipated when enough physical damage is done to it. So I thought if you fought with this clone you can train with the clone and not worry about hurting anyone. Hinata said, Naruto, I guess that would work. Hinata then got into the fighting stance and began fighting with the gentle fist. After a long amount of time, the clone dissipated. When the clone dissipated, Naruto said, so what the book said is true. Naruto then created a few more clones and they continued practicing. The sun began to set as Naruto and Hinata saw what seemed to be a Chunin from the Hyuga clan. The Chunin said, Lady Hinata, there you are. We were looking for you everywhere. Naruto smiled and said, well, I was helping Hinata train. Well, I found this way dash. There is no need to know anything you want to do, demon. Also, if Lady Hinata wants to train with the gentle fist, she has the compound to train in. The Chunin barked at Naruto. The Chunin then grabbed Hinata by the arm and pulled her away. As they left, Naruto yelled, hey Hinata, I will see you tomorrow. Hinata then smiled and said, why yes Naruto, see you tomorrow? As the Chunin took Hinata away, he said, Lady Hinata, you shouldn't trust that child. He isn't right. No matter how nice he is probably using you. Hinata didn't respond to this, as she realized he probably won't listen to anything she has to say about him. She was just happy she got to spend time with the boy she had a crush on. Naruto Uchiha, Kanehagakure Academy. Next day. When Naruto entered the academy, most of the seats were taken as he came in late. Sasuke was surrounded by his fangirls and Hinata was stuck next to Kiba. Naruto saw the only person left to sit next to was Shino. When Naruto sat next to him, he asked Shino, hey Shino, I noticed you seem more sad than you normally are. Is there a reason? Shino then looked up at Naruto and told him, Naruto, well, I guess you could say there is some trouble at home. Since before I can remember I've lived with Toryun and he was forced to leave. Naruto then asked Shino, so what's so special about Toryun? Shino smiled under his large coat and said, Toryun is like me, he is an Aburame. However, unlike me, he couldn't control his bugs properly, so he has had to stay at home, and he has truly been my only friend. Shino then paused and Naruto asked, so what changed? Shino replied, well, an older man, and by older I mean the age of Lord Third came. This man wore a white shirt and a gray robe. He had a cane and a bandage over his eye. He was trying to force my father to hand me over to his organization, but Toryun volunteered himself so I could stay and make friends. Shino sighed and continued, however, I have had trouble making friends as I haven't spent a lot of time socializing. Naruto smiled and told him, well, I could be your friend and maybe I could get Hinata too as well. Shino smiled at this and said, well, I would like that a lot, Naruto. Naruto scratched his chin and said, although I am interested in what this organization this old man is a part of. Shino replied, I am as well. Perhaps once we are shinobi we can investigate it. Naruto smiled and added, yeah, and we can bring Toryun back. Shino smiled and said perhaps as Iruk began his lecture. Land of Sound, Jiraiya. Jiraiya walked through the fields of rice stalks. Jiraiya had heard of a political shift in this land. For many years this village didn't have any hidden villages. After all, it didn't need any, for they didn't border any great nation besides the Land of Fire. This land, though, suddenly had one pop up to Jiraiya. This was very suspicious. Jiraiya then entered a deep valley. And in there he found what seemed to be a few watchtowers and a large building. To many shinobi it would be hard to get to this building. However, for someone as skilled as Jiraiya it was quite easy. When Jiraiya entered this building he realized it appeared to be some form of prison. Jiraiya thought to himself, this place screams Orochimaru. Jiraiya went further into this prison and he saw it was more than just a prison. He entered one room and found a laboratory. Jiraiya looked into the room and saw corpses of what looked like adults. All of them seemed to have a form of a mark on their body. Jiraiya looked closer and saw that it appeared to be similar to a sage mode. Many of them appeared to be like what happened to those who did the training improperly. Jiraiya thought, what kind of perverted power have you been using, Orochimaru? Jiraiya went further into this room and saw a single tube. A tube that appeared to have a child no older than 14. This child had very pale skin and 2 red dots on his forehead. Jiraiya moved closer to the tube containing him and saw a journal that was lying next to the tube. Jiraiya pocketed the journal and despite what logic told him and opened the tube, the liquid that filled it went everywhere in the room, and as the child began to fall out of it, he caught him and put him over his shoulder and began to go towards the exit. Jiraiya was out of the hideout and back into the rice fields when 4 shinobi came out of the fields with bows and arrows and said, "Did you really think you could escape with the subject without being spotted?" Jiraiya sighed and said, "Well, I hoped I would. Tell me, are you the only ones who followed me?" The 4 shinobi snickered and said, "Yeah, and we are all that we need to beat you." The 4 shot arrows and Jiraiya's hair began to cover his body, protecting him and the child. The 4 shinobi were confused by this. However, before they could react, hair that acted like sunban hit the 4 shinobi to kill them. Jiraiya, after killing them, chuckled and body flickered away to a safer location. Jiraiya sat down next to a tree as the child who he had taken from the lab began to wake up. The child opened his green eyes and jumped back in surprise, saying, "Where am I? Where is Lord Orochimaru?" Jiraiya sighed and said, "Far away from here, and why do you care about him?" Kimimaro said, "Lord Orochimaru saved me from the Mizukage and his Hunter Nin. When his Hunter Nin came to eradicate my clan, the Kagaya clan, Lord Orochimaru saved me, and he said he would make it so I can be strong enough to protect myself." Jiraiya said, "Listen, Orochimaru doesn't care for anyone but himself. He abandoned his village and has done horrible experiments on people to discover all jutsu. Listen, if you want to learn to protect yourself, I can do that." Kimimaro thought about it and said, "Fine. I will travel with you. However, you must train me to be a shinobi." Jiraiya chuckled and said, "Sure, kiddo. I will train you." Land of Water, Meitarumi. Meitarumi was sitting in a tent set up in their hideout as an impromptu war room. It had been 1 year since they had been forced from their home in Kirigakure. The reign of the 4th Mizukage had been always contested, as many had hated and feared his status as a Jinchuriki. However, he had become more cruel as the years had gone on. He had begun the purges using the excuse of the Kagaya's short-lived revolt, and he used Zabuza's attempted putsch to begin a purge of more rivals, and that led to a faction under the leadership of Meitarumi and Ao to leave the village. As the civil war had clearly had factions forming, it would lead to the Hozuki clan joining, Mei led by Mangetsu of the 7 Swordsmen and 2 others of the group to join them. The maps had been drawn with Yagura and his loyalists controlling the mainland and the rebels holding the islands. All the gravitas that might involve a civil war was quite overblown in this case, as the closest thing to a battle was when an outpost near the border of the mainland had foolishly tried to take on the rebels as they made their escape. Most conflict was restricted to the sea, as the navy pledged loyalty to the rebels and had held a crippling blockade on Yagura's forces from getting grains to feed his armies or weapons to arm them. However, not all had been going well, as they couldn't defeat Yagura in open battle, as it would be suicide to take on a perfect Jinchuriki. So this would be where they were at. The military council came into the room. This included her second-in-command Ao, the head of the Hozuki clan Mangetsu, and his apprentice and his brother Mangetsu. Another was a tall man who wore garb similar to that of the Hunter Nin, the 17-year-old last head of the Kagaya clan Naruto. He was one of the first to come to support the rebels. He was the son of the head of the Kagaya, whisked away before the revolt in case of failure with 2 fellow Kagaya. The last to join the meeting was Kahayo Yuki, a newly joined member of this alliance. As of they knew the last of her clan, she had just come out of hiding in the Land of Waves with her son. The first one to speak was Naruto. He said, "So my men have confirmed the rumors are true. It appears that the reason Yagura has been able to hold out is because Orochimaru and his Sound Village have been supplying him with supplies through hidden channels." The next one to speak was Mangetsu, who asked, "Is it possible to prevent this?" Naruto nodded and said, "Yes, it is possible. However, it would mean taking a big risk, a risk we would need help doing." Mei then interrupted, saying, "What are you proposing, Naruto?" Naruto replied, "I am proposing we go to the Leaf for support." Saying this would get a groan from many, as only a few would actually purpose an alliance with their longtime rival. Ao spoke up, saying, "We can't trust them, especially with Shimura and Saratobi there." Naruto then said, "Not through them exactly. I would say more of Jiraiya of the Sannin. They would support this more. After all, in the Land of Water, many would say is Jiraiya is more trustworthy in any agreement over as they the 3rd Hokage, the deal breakers." Ao sighed and said, Fine, all in favor of this raise your hand. The hands of Mangetsu, Naruto, and Kahayo went up. Ao then said, all against. The hands of Ao went up. After this, the meeting ended. As Naruto went to leave, Mei spoke to him, saying, Naruto, can I have a moment with you? Naruto then said, yes, Lady Mei. Mei smiled and said, please, no need to be so formal, so who have you chosen for this mission? Naruto replied, Kahayo and myself. After all, I believe it is time that she proves herself. Mei smiled and said, very well. However, make sure to be careful. You don't know who may be out to kill you. Naruto smiled and said, don't worry, Lady Mei, they don't call me Naruto of the Bone Pulse for nothing. Jiraiya, Land of Fire. Jiraiya went into the room of the inn he was staying in. As they journeyed throughout the land of sound, Kimimaro had made sure that no one saw him, as in his word, he was a prized subject of Lord Orochimaru. When Jiraiya entered the room, Kimimaro jumped to his feet and said, Master Jiraiya, you have returned. So did you get any intel about this town? Jiraiya said, yeah, well, there seems to be very few who know about this lab you told me about. However, your intel seems to still check out. So what's so special about this lab? Kimimaro said, well, this lab was used for more unusual experiments. However, I believe this place was used for more unusual experiments. This place, Lord Orochimaru started experimenting with Uchiha cells. He wanted to create a body which could use the Mangekyo without the disadvantages. Jiraiya then asked, so was he able to do it successfully? Kimimaro responded, only partially. His body degrades with Mangekyo usage, and since Lord Orochimaru doesn't have a medical means skilled enough to fix that issue, he has deemed it a failure and plans to dispose of him. However, if we act quickly, we can prevent this from happening. Jiraiya thought about it and asked, so where would they put him? Kimimaro replied, he would be put at the back of the lab. The lab should be more well guarded than the one you took me from. However, shinobi of our skills should have no trouble doing this. Jiraiya then stood up and said, whoa, kid. I won't doubt I could get into this lab, no problem, but I don't know about you. Kimimaro gave an annoyed stare and said, Master Jiraiya, I was personally being trained by Orochimaru and am proficient in taijutsu, ninjutsu, genjutsu, and am in full control of my Kekkei Genkai. Also, to find the specific area you will need my help. Kimimaro then showed his control over his Kekkei Genkai by pulling a bone out of his arm. Jiraiya chuckled and said, fine. But if you get hurt, don't blame me. Land of Wind, Southern Village. Hana was always treated strangely by many in her home. She was an orphan. Her father had died when she was young due to their poverty and the extreme conditions they had to grow up in, and a mother who all she knew about was that she was a shinobi who died in the last war. She was mocked by some at her school for her hair being orange and green. Some thought she tried to emulate the famous Bakura. This fact became quite ironic when it was found out that she had the very same Kekkei Genkai Scorch release. If this had been anywhere else, she probably been any other nation, she probably been taken to the hidden village and been trained to use it. However, this was the Land of Wind, a place where communication was sparse, and if this news would ever reach there, it would take years due to poor communication, and cities were separated by massive deserts. Hana walked through the streets of this city when she was stopped by a man with silver hair and a pair of glasses. The man said, hello, little girl, I heard an interesting rumor about you. Could you please tell me if it is true or not? Hana then smiled and responded, well, I can't confirm or deny it unless I can get something out of this. What's your name? The silver-haired man said, my name is Kabuto Yakushi, and what did you have in mind? Hana responded, well, all I want is some water. After all, it is very hot out here. Kabuto sighed and said, fine, but this better be worth it. Kabuto then tossed a cantina to Hana and she drank the entire thing. Hana then said, thanks. Anyway, your rumor is true. She then demonstrated her Kekkei Genkai by creating a small glowing ball of fire. Kabuto then smiled and said, yes, so the rumors are true. So what is someone like you doing in a place like this? Hana responded, well, it's not exactly like I can afford to leave even if I wanted to. After saying this, Kabuto smiled and said, well, I may have something like that. I have a few associates that will be coming in a week. After dark, I would like you to go to the edge of town and they will pick you up. Hana thought about it and said, sure. I'll be there. Anywhere is better than here. Land of Sound, Tayuya. Tayuya walked through the halls of one of Orochimaru's hideouts. The newly formed Sound Four had been told to go to one of his hideouts. As she entered the room, she saw that besides her teammates, she saw that there was Orochimaru, Kabuto, Guren, and the team of genin that had been recently taken in. Orochimaru spoke up and said, "Thank you for coming. Now we must change our plans. For it appears that Kimimaro has abandoned us." This news caused shock on the faces of all of the members of the meeting, as most that knew Kimimaro had thought that he wouldn't be the type to leave, as he had seemed to be very loyal to the village. Guren spoke up asking Orochimaru, "Lord Orochimaru, what should we do now? Who will lead the Sound Four?" Orochimaru smiled and said, "I believe Tayuya should lead them and Yugo should join the Sound Four. In addition, you will train this squad of genin so that they can become stronger." The news of Tayuya replacing Kimimaro in the Sound Four was surprising, and the addition of Yugo into the group, as he was seen as uncontrollable. However, everyone was surprised by Guren being chosen to lead a squad, as to all except a select few she was an unknown. Guren responded to this by laughing and saying, "Thank you, Lord Orochimaru. I will mold them into the perfect weapons for your goals." This statement gave a small fright to those three genin. Guren, seeing the three and then walking over to them, smiled and said, "Ah, good, you no fear. I now know what I should beat out of you along with pride." Orochimaru smiled and told Guren, "Now, Guren, you may leave with your new students. I have great hopes for them." Guren nodded and left with them. Orochimaru then turned to Kabuto and said, "Now, Kabuto, I want you to deal with the Shin before you get the girl." Kabuto smiled and said, "Yes, Lord Orochimaru, it will be done." Orochimaru then turned to the Sound Four and said, "Saken and Ukanai want you to get rid of the head of the Land of Sound. His actions are becoming troublesome. Jirobo and Kitamaro, you will begin making a deal with the Fuma clan and the Shin clan." The three of them then said, "Yes, Lord Orochimaru, it will be done." Orochimaru then turned to Tayuya and said, "Tayuya, your job will be the most important. You will have to make it so Yugo will be able to accomplish missions with you four." Tayuya responded, "Why, yes, Lord Orochimaru." Orochimaru then smiled and most began leaving the room. However, Orochimaru said, "Tayuya, so quick to leave, you will be traveling with me to see Yugo. After all, this mission will be beginning immediately." Tayuya followed Orochimaru so she could go wherever Yugo was being held. Borders of the Land of Water, Sanaito Kagaya. Sanaito and Kahayo rowed a small boat in between the large warships that made up the blockade, keeping Yugura's forces from getting supplies. Kahayo broke the silence asking Sanaito, "So I was wondering, why does the Land of Water have such a large navy?" Sanaito responded, "It may be shocking for someone from the Land of Waves to realize, but here in the Land of Water we have so much water separating our islands that we have always needed a large navy to maintain a defense, so we have always had a rivalry between the Hidden Village and the Navy, so since Yugura always supported the shinobi over the Navy naturally supported the rebels." Kahayo then said, "Yeah, I get that. However, isn't that expensive to maintain?" Sanaito responded, "Yes, sometime. However, since we have always been a hub for merchants, we have used that to finance it. Anyway, I was wondering, why did you return to the Land of Water?" Kahayo responded, "Well, I returned because it seemed better than the Land of Waves. You see, recently the Land of Waves has been falling under this thug named Gatos Controlo, and I thought it was a good time to get out." Sanaito said, "I heard Gato was involved in some unscrupulous activities, so this matches what I heard. He probably wants to create a monopoly. He also may want to use it as a port for his human trafficking operations." Kahayo asked, "Wait, Gato does human trafficking?" Sanaito replied, "Yes. From what my spies have told me, he traffics suspected Keki Genkai users for underground fight clubs and slavery." Kahayo responded, "This is crazy. Why haven't the four nations cracked down on this?" Sanaito answered, "Isn't obvious they profit from it. Officials from the Land of Earth, Lightning, and Earth take bribes, and Danzo Shimura takes people to mold into his root shinobi." Kahayo gave a small laugh and said, "This makes me glad I left when I did." As they finished talking, they made it to the coast. As the two of them exited the boats, Kahayo asked Sanaito, "So what's the plan?" Sanaito replied, "My plan is to begin moving northward, as my last reports tell that Jiraiya has been moving in and near the border of the newly created Land of Sound, and attempt to make contact from there." Kahayo responded, "Yes, sir." The two of them began their trek northward. However, as they headed northward, someone was watching them. Leaf Village, White Zetsu. White Zetsu was watching over Naruto's home like most of his days were spent. However, today that schedule was broken by the intrusion of Black Zetsu. Black Zetsu said to him, "What are you doing here? Has one of you finally gone rogue?" White Zetsu laughed and said, "No, no, no. I am just following Master Madara's final orders." A scowl appeared on Black Zetsu's face as he said to White Zetsu, "And what are those orders you speak of?" White Zetsu then said, "To protect Naruto. It was Master Madara's last orders." A scowl developed on White Zetsu's face as he asked, "I hope you don't plan to interfere in that." Black Zetsu chuckled and said, "Not yet, and besides we both know neither of us are any good in an actual fight. We are best stick to infiltration." White Zetsu responded, "That's not entirely true. Master Madara made it so that I am much stronger than the others. However, I would prefer to not to come to blows yet, so I will abstain unless you hurt Master Naruto." Black Zetsu responded, "No, I will not fight you yet. However, when do you plan to tell Naruto about what you put in him in addition to your existence?" White Zetsu sighed and then said, "I will in due time. After all, Naruto is still growing. He needs some time without me for a bit longer." After White Zetsu said this, Black Zetsu began to leave, returning to the ground that he had come from. Land of Sound, Kimimaro Kagaya. Kimimaro led Jiraiya to Orochimaru's laboratory. As they approached the facility, it began to be shown that this facility had clearly been poorly maintained, unlike many of Orochimaru's other laboratories not even having guards outside. The two of them entered the laboratory cautiously. They made sure to leave nothing to chance. As the two of them got farther into the laboratory, more of Orochimaru's typical design choices, while areas near the entrance had a more stone-like design with carefully designed stone floors and walls with foliage covering the walls. However, the deeper parts appeared to have only stone floors with a very dark stone that looked carelessly made, and the walls and roof were made of steel. The pipes also appeared to be leaking water, and the smell of dead bodies from failed experiments was very clear in the air. As they went through the halls, Jiraiya asked Kimimaro, "How does Orochimaru keep getting people to work with him? You'd think he would run out of scientists like him?" Kimimaro chuckled and said, "You might think so, but Orochimaru brings those who have felt disenfranchised, those seeking power and shinobi fleeing the civil war in Kir. After all, he's been taking from Kiri since before the civil war." The two of them continued moving, and Kimimaro thought, "I guess I'm not one to talk about this. I fall into all three categories." The farther they got into the lab, the tighter security seemed to get. Kimimaro told Jiraiya, "We won't be able to go undetected from this point on. The security will be too tight." Jiraiya sighed and said, "Well, if that's the case, I guess I will create a distraction while you get him." Jiraiya then moved into the opening and engaged with the Sound Shinobi. Jiraiya was easily able to defeat most of the Sound Shinobi, and for a moment Kimimaro was astounded by Jiraiya's skill. However, after that, he began moving quickly to get to the lab. Kimimaro thought, "I should have expected he could handle himself easily. After all, he is one of the three Sannin, and equal to Lord Orochimaru." Kimimaro moved quickly through the halls to get to the lab. He would only stop for a few moments if he had to, because one of the Sound Shinobi was too much of an obstacle to merely evade but had to actually kill. Despite these challenges, Kimimaro made it to a door that was guarded by 5 Sound Shinobi, and as he had remembered, held Shin. As Kimimaro got closer to the door, one of the Sound Shinobi said, "Stop there, you traitor. We won't allow you to pass. Shin has not been dealt with yet." In response to this, Kimimaro sighed and asked, "So I am guessing that you won't just let me pass. Master Jiraiya won't be happy I took so long to get Shin." Another one of the Sound Shinobi said, Jiraiya, this kid is with Jiraiya." That shinobi began to shake, and a third one said, "Stop it. Lord Orochimaru told us to hold out till Master Kabuto is done in there, and that is what we will do." Kimimaro, after hearing what they said, rushed towards them. He jumped high in the air, and as he was in the air, shot boned out of his fingers, killing 3 of them. As he landed, 2 pulled kunai and tried to kill him. However, he was able to pull bones out of him to block the kunai. However, after that, he used the bones to push the kunai out of their hands and stabbed them in the head, killing them. As one of them fell, a key to the room fell out of his jacket. Kimimaro picked it up and used it to open the door. However, what he opened it to was Kabuto about to put a chakra scalpel through the neck of a terrified Shin. Shin Uchiha. Kabuto held his chakra scalpel at his neck. Shin could feel the chakra scalpel near his neck. Shin looked up and saw a man with silver hair and glasses that Orochimaru had called Kabuto. Shin then looked to the door and saw Kimimaro. Kimimaro had been kind to him the few times he had come to visit. Kimimaro spoke up saying, "Kabuto, don't do this." Kabuto chuckled and said, "And what incentivizes me to do that?" Kimimaro then answered, "I won't tell anyone of your spy work." Kabuto used his free hand to fix his glasses and said, All right Kimimaro, and to incentivize you to keep that promise I will tell you something to keep you occupied. Some of our agents are heading to a village in the south of the Land of Wind to get a Kekkei Genkai user. If you move fast you could stop them." Shin was surprised by what was going on but felt a sigh of relief when Kabuto released the chakra scalpel and threw him towards Kimimaro. Shin asked Kabuto, "What's going on? Why were you going to kill me?" Kabuto gave an annoyed sigh and said, "Lord Orochimaru has no use for those who can't even fulfill their assigned purpose, and so he had sent me to deal with you. However, you appear to have a savior." As Kabuto said this, it appeared to shatter the very fragile world that had existed for Shin. Shin then quietly said, "Orochimaru thinks I am useless." Kabuto then laughed as he began to leave. However, before anything could have calmed down after the exit of Kabuto, a loud explosion had rocked the room. Kimimaro grabbed Shin as the roof around them began to fall inward and blocked all exits. As the air began to clear in the sky, they saw two people riding on what appeared to be giant clay birds. The two men both wore black cloaks with red clouds on them. One of the two men had yellow hair and a ponytail and had a scope on one of his eyes, and the other man had black hair and charcoal black eyes. The silence was broken when the bondman spoke up saying, "Hey, do either of you know where that snake Orochimaru is?" Shin was too scared to speak. He was frozen by silence, but luckily Kimimaro spoke up saying, "He's not here, and we don't know where he is. Orochimaru is no friend of us." The man then said, "Likely story. Time to showcase some of my art." The man had small clay birds come out of the large clay bird he was standing on. This action broke his fear, and Shin activated his Mangekyou, causing those birds to head back to them. However, before they could, the man made them explode. The first man said, "Now this is interesting. Hey Itachi, this kid has the same eyes as you." The other man, now known as Itachi, said, "It appears he does." The blonde man appeared to getting ready for another attack when Jiraiya came in with body flicker. Everyone appeared to be surprised by this, and Kimimaro gave a sigh of relief. The blonde man asked Itachi, "Who is this man Itachi?" Itachi then responded, "This is Jiraiya of the Sannin, and he is far stronger than us. We must retreat." After a small bit of complaining, the two of them had flown away. Jiraiya then spoke up saying, "So you're Shin, huh? Can you tell me a bit about yourself?" Sasuke Uchiha. Naruto sat in one of the training fields with Sasuke. Naruto had made it part of his daily life to train with him every other day. Right now the two of them were laying in the grass. They had finished sparring, and Naruto said to Sasuke, "You know, if there is one thing that you have that I wished I would say, it is that you knew who your family is." After saying this, Sasuke flinched. His mind had begun to go back to that day when that ended, and he said to Naruto, "And why is that?" "So you can know what it is like to have that all taken away from you by someone you believed you could trust." Naruto replied, "Well, all I really want to know is what it is like to have one around you. To even know what my parents' voice sounds like. Did I have siblings? What was my family's last name? Yeah, I know I have the name Uzumaki, but did that mean anything, or was that just a random name the orphanage gave me?" Sasuke felt taken back by this, as this wasn't something he could know or relate to, as he had always known who he was. He was an Uchiha, and that was something that had defined him. He also doesn't know what it would be like to not know what his mom was like, or even, as much as he hated to admit it, how he had looked up to Itachi. Sasuke then tried to think of a way to comfort Naruto, and he had thought of one way. Sasuke said to Naruto, "Well, let's think about it. Uzumaki is a pretty uncommon name in the Land of Fire, and I think I heard about it once or twice in our history books at the academy, so let's see if it is an old clan name. Come on, let's go to the library." Naruto nodded, and the two of them began the trek to the library. As the two of them entered, the librarian smiled when she saw Sasuke. However, when she saw Naruto, she frowned and said, "Sasuke, how may I help you today?" Sasuke gave a small frown as he noticed that she seemed to show a small amount of disdain to Naruto. So he then said, "Well, ma'am, me and Naruto here have come to learn about some clans of other villages." The lady then said, Sure, young Sasuke. Hey Shiho, can you help these young boys? The librarian pointed at a young girl carrying books. The librarian said, she will help you. Shiho then put down the books she was carrying and went over to Naruto and Sasuke and said, and Naruto and Sasuke, what is it that you are looking for? Naruto and Sasuke followed the girl to the section of the library that contained the books that they were looking for. Shiho said, well, this section should have books on the clans. Sasuke said, well, this will probably take a while to do. After Sasuke said this, Naruto created 5 clones of himself and said, this should help us. These are shadow clones, unlike regular clones. These ones can touch things and they follow my commands. Also, when they are destroyed, I retain their memories. After Naruto said this, Shiho said, whoa, that's impressive. That's a pretty advanced jutsu. After this, the 3 of them began to get to work, as they went through the many books before they were able to find anything useful. Shiho spoke up saying, hey, I think that I found something. After she said this, Naruto and Sasuke walked toward her, and she told them, this book says that the Uzumaki clan is known for their red hair and those with great potential red eyes. They also were known for their sealing jutsu, large chakra pools, and the ability to unlock something called chakra chains. They also had their own hidden village, Whirlpool. Sasuke then chuckled and said, well, Naruto, I guess that name does mean something. You do have the eyes. Anyway, Shiho, do you where Whirlpool is? After he said this, Shiho said, well, I know where it used to be. Whirlpool was destroyed in the Second Shinobi War by lightning and the mist villages. However, that doesn't mean there are no Uzumakis left, as many were able to escape into other villages. After hearing all that, Naruto put his hands over his face and said, damn it. I just found out I am from some big famous clan, and then I learned they are all dead. Sasuke felt like he could somewhat comfort Naruto. He knew what it is like to lose everything and said to Naruto, well, they aren't all gone. Besides, this does tell us something. If there were any Uzumaki in Konoha before the Nine Tails attack, they might have been your parents. Naruto then chuckled and said, yeah, and besides, if I am an Uzumaki, I have a legacy to uphold. Naruto also thought, so maybe that meeting with Izuna wasn't a dream. Sanaido Kagaya, Land of Water, 10 years ago. Sanaido sat on a boat traversing one of the straits that were between the many islands that made up the Land of Water. The boat headed to a dock. The dock appeared to be quite large. It had many boats docked there with a large number of people working there. Sanaido jumped off the boat as it docked there. He walked over to what appeared to be a makeshift visitor center. The place was poorly maintained as more than one wall had cracks in it and there was mold everywhere. Sanaido sat in one of the few benches that appeared to be left. Sanaido sat there and just listened to what the people around him were saying, as after his father had sent him away, he had no news from the clan, and places like this were a prime destination for people from the capital with news about the coup. Sanaido didn't have to wait long as a few men began talking. One of them said, do you guys know why travel to the capital is limited? Another one then spoke up and said, I heard the Kagaya clan tried to take over the village, and after they failed, Lord Yagura is trying to rout out their supporters. The third one said, yeah, I just got out of there and Lord Yagura gave this speech. He seems like he is going to get rid of the Kekii Genkai clans. Honestly makes me glad I am not a Yuhi right now. After hearing this, Sanaido's heart sank. He thought, so it was all for nothing. So what should my next move be? Sanaido stood up and began moving toward the exit and thought, maybe I can get to a few Kekii Genkai users before it is too late. Sanaido then went onto a small boat and took it before anyone could catch him and headed towards the Yuhi clan's lands. Tayuya, Land of Sound Border. Tayuya walked down the halls of the northern hideout. She was led by one of Orochimaru's jonin. They eventually got to a large door, and the jonin told Tayuya, I was not ordered to go any farther, so beyond this point you are on your own. Tayuya then nodded and entered the room. The room was very dark, and she could see in the very back was a man in the same clothing as many of the prisoners had. This man also had orange hair and seemed to be very tall. Tayuya said to the man, Yugo, are you Yugo? The man then looked at her and said, yes, I am. You aren't Kimimaro, where is he? Tayuya then spoke up telling him, Kimimaro has abandoned Lord Orochimaru. He apparently joined the Leaf. Lord Orochimaru now demands you take his place. Yugo stood up and said, I cannot do this. No one will be able to control me if I lose control. Tayuya then said, I should be able to control you with a genjutsu that Lord Orochimaru taught me. After she said this, Yugo began to laugh and transformed and said, "So you want to test that theory?" Yugo began to change and his skin turned gray and he turned into a monstrous form. As he began to approach Tayuya, she put her flute to her lips and played a genjutsu which pulled him out of this form. Yugo asked her, "How did you do that?" Tayuya then responded, "What, you didn't think Lord Orochimaru would have a fail-safe plan after turning that power into his curse marks? Now let's go, Lord Orochimaru is expecting us. He probably has a mission already waiting for us to do now." Yugo then got up and said, "Yeah." As they made their way out of the northern hideout. Kakashi Hatake, Kanehagakure Hokage Tower. Kakashi walked into the Hokage's office and saw that he wasn't the only one who had been called. It appeared Hiruzen had also called Tenzo. Hiruzen spoke saying, "Kakashi and Tenzo, thank you for coming. For the last 2 months Jiraiya has been off the grid. I want the two of you to find him." The last messenger Toad said that he was heading to the Land of Wind. Kakashi then nodded and said, "Yes, Lord Hokage, it will be done." After the two of them left the room, Kakashi went to Tenzo and said, "So when are we going to be leaving for this mission?" Tenzo responded, "Lord Hokage said we will leave after dark." Kakashi then thought, "So I guess I have time to check on him." Tenzo then said to Kakashi, "Lord Hokage also said that Jiraiya had a subject of Orochimaru with him. Why do you think he might be doing that?" Kakashi said, "Maybe a prisoner, or maybe he is like you. Weren't you a subject of his?" Tenzo then said, "I believe I was, however, I don't think I remember him at all. I believe I was directly handed over to Danzo." After Tenzo said this, Kakashi began to walk away and Tenzo asked him, "Where are you going? It's nearly dusk." Kakashi then gave a smile under his mask and said, "There is someone I would like to check on before I leave." Kakashi then body flickered away to one of the training fields where 2 raven-haired kids were sparring. Kakashi observed the 2 kids sparring and thought, "Good. Naruto, it appears you made a friend." When Naruto and Sasuke finished sparring, Naruto looked up and saw Kakashi sitting in the tree. Naruto said to Sasuke, "Hey Sasuke, there is some guy sitting in that tree." Sasuke then looked up and said, "Hey you, it is rude to watch people without their permission." Kakashi then jumped down and said, "Sorry, I was just impressed. You know, most academy students don't take training this seriously." Sasuke then said, "Yeah, well, we have goals to work towards." Kakashi raised an eyebrow and said to the two of them, "Oh yeah, and what would they be?" Sasuke said, "I want to kill Itachi to avenge the clan." And Naruto said, "I want to live up to the legacy of the Uzumaki clan." Kakashi smiled and said, "Well, I hope the two of you good fortune." As Kakashi began to leave, Sasuke asked him, "Do you know if there were any Uzumakis living in the leaf before the Nine Tails attack?" Kakashi stopped when he said that and said, "Yes, she was Kushina Uzumaki." After Kakashi said this, he body flickered away, leaving the 2 academy students amazed. Kakashi's body flickered away to the gates, with Tenzo waiting. Tenzo said to Kakashi, "So are you ready to leave for the mission?" Kakashi put on his Umbu mask and nodded, and the two of them left. Black Zetsu. Black Zetsu sat in one of the many hideouts of the Akatsuki when Obito used his Kamui to appear before him. Obito said to Black Zetsu, "Zetsu, I was scouting in the leaf when I found what appeared to be a white Zetsu in the shadows. Did you authorize it to go there?" Black Zetsu looked up and said, "No, I didn't. I myself investigated it, and it appears that Madara sent it to watch over Naruto. Apparently, he is the grandson of Izuna Uchiha." Obito's eyes widened at that and said, "Now that is interesting. Do you think we should deal with this Zetsu?" Black Zetsu said, "No, that won't be necessary. Now Obito, how are the plans going?" Obito then told him, "Well, I believe Nagato will begin the hunt for the tail beast soon." Black Zetsu then chuckled and said, "Everything is going according to plan. Soon we can commence the Eye of the Moon plan." Black Zetsu thought, "Soon, mother, we will free Ugurin, land of sound." Gurin gathered 3 students here. She had spent the last month training them through a grueling regimen of hand-to-hand combat and chakra control. Dosu spoke up saying, "Sensei, why is it that you are putting through this horrible training? I doubt any other village is having their academy students do this. Guren then replied saying, listen, we are a very small village, and due to that we can't field as many shinobi as the land of fire or stone. So Lord Orochimaru has decided to use a strategy of quality over quantity. Zaku then smirked and sighed. I get it. Since we are small we can't slack off like others. Guren smiled and said, yeah, and besides Lord Orochimaru has plans for you, so you better not disappoint. Kin, who up to this point had been quiet, spoke up and said, so sensei, could explain a little more about your Kekkei Genkai crystal release. Guren nodded and said, crystal release, unlike Kekkei Genkai, can take a lot more chakra, since it doesn't naturally appear in clearly nature like earth, wind or water. I need to use my chakra with extremely accurate chakra control. This skill in chakra control I've developed allows me to last in battle much longer than many others due to not wasting any chakra. Guren then demonstrated using her chakra to make a crystal in the shape of a kunai, and launched it at a tree with speeds which no normal kunai could go. Guren then told her students, for today's training I would like for Dosu to try improving your hand-to-hand combat, so you will train directly with me. Zaku, I would like you to see if you can improve the range of your sound jutsu, and Kin, can you try to improve on the genjutsu I taught you? Zaku and Kin left to do their own things and Dosu began practicing with Guren. Dosu used his sound tools to complement his style, which had to do with a lot of stay in the air and making sure they can't make a counterattack. He in addition used his tools to hit her in important points. Guren thought, this kid shows promise. If I can improve his stamina, he could be useful for Lord Orochimaru. Their training session went on for 20 minutes until it was interrupted by Kabuto coming. Kabuto said, nice to see you training, Dosu. Maybe one day you'll be worth something. Dosu scoffed at this. He held his tongue, knowing the power Kabuto had in the sound. Guren then said, hey Kabuto, what are you doing here? Don't you know I have to do? Guren hid no distaste, as she had nothing to fear due to her standing with Orochimaru. Kabuto sighed and said, Lord Orochimaru wants to see the results of your work. He has a mission for you. He wants you to monitor shipping in the land of water. Guren then, in an angered tone, said, hey, these kids aren't ready, I just finished getting through chakra control. Kabuto then smiled and said, regardless, you have a job to do unless you want me to just tell Orochimaru you're subpar. Guren realized what happened and Kabuto probably suggested this and wanted her to fail, so she would lose standing to him with Orochimaru. Guren then said, fine. Dosu, gather the other two, we are going on a trip. Kabuto smiled and said, good luck on your trip, Guren. Guren sighed in frustration, thinking hopefully all of us can come back alive. We will prove Kabuto wrong. Kimimaro Kagaya, land of wind border. Kimimaro sat next to a fire with Jiraiya and Shin. Kimimaro said to Shin, so what exactly are you? What did Orochimaru do to make you? Shin then looked up and said to Kimimaro, Lord Orochimaru created me as a last resort vessel. I was made from Uchiha cells, Uzumaki cells, and some of his own. Jiraiya said, so you kind of his child? Shin then replied, technically yes, however I do not view him as a father. I would much rather take the clan I have the most cells from, the Uchiha clan. Shin then activated his 3-tomo Sharingan. Kimimaro asked in response to this, so you've mastered the Sharingan? Have you awakened the Mangekyo Sharingan? Shin flinched at that and said, why yes I have, and my Mangekyo abilities in my right eye I can use Benzaiten, a jutsu that allows me to take control of any ninja weapon or tool. I also have in my left eye Bishamon, and that allows me to transport me or others to a specific location. With this jutsu I must be in close proximity to the person I want to transport, and I must clearly know where I want to go. This can eat up chakra quickly, so I try to use it as a last resort. Jiraiya laughed when he was done talking and told the two of them and said, well, this is quite the team I am building here, one of the last Kagayas and a Orochimaru's Uchiha experiment. Now the two of you get to sleep, I will take the first watch. Kimimaro, now slightly annoyed by the comment, answered, yes, Master Jiraiya. Shin, who was also very irritated, said, well, if you two insist, I will go to sleep. The two then went to sleep before their journey in the desert. Sanaito Kagaya, land of fire. Sanaito and Kahayo were relaxing in one of the many forests in the land of fire. Kahayo asked Sanaito, so where are we headed? Sanaito sighed and told her, My spies have told me that Jiraiya is in the land of wind, so that is where we are headed. Kahayo sighed and said, Man, this is starting to feel like a wild goose chase. Tsunade, who was now starting to get annoyed, asked her, Kahayo, if this is so annoying, why did you come here? Kahayo responded, Well, I was kinda told to, and anyway, I haven't exactly gotten a chance to prove myself to you and Lady May. Tsunade then asked Kahayo, Aren't you from the land of waves? Why did you come to the land of water? Kahayo responded, That's not completely true. I was born in the land of water and I got married there and had a kid. However, after the purges began, a mob tried to kill us and my husband got in the way and they killed him, so I basically grabbed my son and whatever I could carry and left. However, things didn't exactly improve in the land of waves. Some shipping magnate has been taking over. Everything is overpriced due to that and food is scarce. Someone tried to stand up before I left, but he was killed of his troubles. So when I heard about revolution in my homeland, I decided to join the fight. After she said this, Tsunade put up his hand, signaling here to get quiet. Tsunade signaled that someone else was here. After he said that, 8 shinobi in umbu gear came out of the trees. After they came out, Tsunade moved to action. He pointed his fingers, 3 of them, shooting the bones from his fingers, shooting them at their heads, causing them to go through their brains, killing them. After Tsunade easily defeated their comrades, 2 of the 5 jumped back. They then went after Kahayo. Kahayo, in response to this, created ice senbon out of the condensation in the air, shooting into the pressure points of one of them, causing him to go limp. After this, the second one tried to kill Kahayo with a kunai. However, Kahayo quickly took out one and deflected the attack. Kahayo then made hand signs and shot water out of her mouth. However, when the water got close to the umbu, it transformed into ice and slices of it pinned him down. After this, Kahayo took out 2 kunai with explosive tags and used them on the injured shinobi. Meanwhile, Tsunade fought the 3 remaining umbu. One of the umbu took out a sword and Tsunade and him began a kenjutsu duel, which only lasted for a short amount of time because they were interrupted by another umbu who was Aburame. Tsunade, realizing the threat of this Aburame, and pulled spine bones and pulled him in to kill him with a kunai. The sword-wielding umbu attacked him and got killed with a quick slice. The last umbu went underground and tried to grab Tsunade's feet. However, Tsunade jumped out of the way when he came above ground and stabbed him with a bone and with a kick shattered his mask. Before the fight could continue, Kahayo came and hit his chakra points with senbon, causing him to go limp. Tsunade said to the now limp umbu, I know you can hear me and talk. Tell me, what was your mission and who sent you here? The umbu laughed and said, I'm pretty sure you know my mission and I can't tell you anything anyway. The umbu then showed his tongue, which had a curse mark. Tsunade said, What a pity. Tsunade then sent one of his bones through the man's skull. Kahayo asked, Why did you do that? Tsunade said, He had a curse mark, so we couldn't get anything. This does tell us something. Danzo is after us, so we will have to move up our times table. Naruto, Leaf Village. Naruto was walking around the village center when Hinata came running up to him saying, Naruto, where have you been? I haven't seen you in a while. Naruto then said, Sorry, I was doing something for the last few days with Sasuke. See, I was Naruto was then interrupted by the voice of a Hyuga child, someone who looked slightly older than them. The Hyuga said, Lady Hinata, you shouldn't be talking to a no-clan like him. This annoyed Naruto, who yelled, Hey, who are you calling a no-clan? I'm of the Uzumaki clan of Whirlpool, and I will rebuild it. The Hyuga smiled and said, Oh really, you claim to be of the Uzumaki clan? Even if you are, it doesn't matter, for they were destroyed at the destruction of Whirlpool, and that is their fate. Any attempt to change that would be useless. Naruto realized he couldn't win with this kid and began to leave. When he did this, Hinata began following him saying, Wait, Naruto, don't be mad at Niji. He has been this way since his father died. Naruto tried to calm down, saying, Well, I guess I can understand that, but that doesn't mean I forgive him for saying that about my clan. Hinata asked Naruto, So are you really from the Uzumaki clan? Naruto responded, Yeah, I don't ever lie. Hinata then said, Well, because I heard they all died at Whirlpool. Naruto then said, Well, not all of them. Anyway, I've got something I have to do. Hinata asked Naruto, And what would that be? Naruto said, I have to talk to the Hokage. Kakashi Hatake, Land of Fire. Kakashi was waiting for Tenzo in one of the many forests of the Land of Fire. Tenzo returned from recon and told Kakashi, "We might have some trouble up ahead. 2 shinobi are up ahead." Kakashi asked Tenzo, friend or foe? Tenzo said, "I believe they are foe. They both have hidden mist headbands. However, with the civil war going on there, we cannot know for sure. However, I suspect rebel." Kakashi then asked, "Why do you suspect that?" Tenzo responded, "One is a Kagaya." Kakashi then said, "I thought they were all dead." Tenzo then said, "Me too. Guess some slipped through the cracks." Kakashi said, "Well, we better deal with them. However, we should be careful in case they could be allies." Kakashi and Tenzo approached the two. This showed as Tenzo said a Kagaya and a young woman. They both had mist headbands. Tenzo went for the woman and Kakashi went for the Kagaya. Kakashi jumped from one of the trees, and with a Chidori Kakashi tried to slice through the Kagaya's heart. However, the Kagaya moved out of the way before Kakashi could hit him with the Chidori. The Kagaya then said, "So you must be Kakashi Hatake, based on your method of attack." Kakashi, surprised, said in response, "Well, you know my name, can I know yours?" The Kagaya then said, "My name is Sanaito, and are you or are you not with Shimura?" Tenzo then said, "Danzo, no, we are not." Sanaito then said, "Good, then we have no need to fight. I'm from the rebellion in the mist. We have a message for Jiraiya of the Sannin, and you can assist us in delivering it." Tenzo then said, "Why would we help you with that?" Sanaito responded, "If you kill us, it could give Orochimaru of the Sannin greater power in the Land of Water, and any alliance would be impossible." Kakashi then said, "What does this have to do with Orochimaru?" Sanaito responded, "That I cannot tell you. My higher-ups said that is only for the eyes of Jiraiya." Kakashi then said, "Fine." Everyone then put away their weapons and Kakashi said, "My latest report said Jiraiya is heading for the Land of Wind, so we better start heading there." Sanaito nodded and the four started their journey for the Land of Wind. Naruto Uzumaki, Land of Fire, Hokage Tower. Naruto walked into the Hokage office. Hiruzen stared at him. Naruto said, "Old man, I have a question for you." Hiruzen then looked up from his pipe and said, "What is it, Naruto?" Naruto then looked Hiruzen in his eyes and said, "Who were my parents?" Hiruzen then looked Naruto in his eyes and said, "Naruto, I wanted to tell you this when you're older, but I guess now is a good time as any. Your parents were Kushina Uzumaki and Minato Namikaze. For the time being, I cannot divulge much about them. However, one thing I can tell you for sure, your parents loved you, and if they could be here, they would." After Hiruzen said this, Naruto began to cry and said to Hiruzen, "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Hiruzen responded, "This is AS class secret. If it got out you are the child of Minato Namikaze, his enemies would come and try to kill you or try to kidnap you." After this, Naruto just cried. He cried because he wished he could have known his parents, but happy he knew who they are now. After Naruto finished crying, he went home. However, there was one more surprise for Naruto in his home. As he opened the door, he saw a creature that wore a black cloak and had completely white skin and seemed to be plant-like in appearance. The creature then said, "Master had told me that once you had the eyes, I should approach you." Naruto then said, "Who are you?" The creature gave a smile and said, "Call me Zetsu. Dosu Kanatu, Land of Water." Dosu walked through the halls of one of the Sound Village's outposts in the border islands in the Land of Water. Guren stood on a balcony in one of the towers with Dosu. Dosu asked his teacher, "So master, what should we expect? It is clear this place should be expecting an attack, so who will it be?" Guren then laughed and said, "Well, technically it could be anyone, but I expect realistically it will either be the rebels or it will be Konoha's spymaster Jiraiya." Dosu's eyes widened and he asked, "Jiraiya of the Sannin?" Guren responded, "That's the one. I know what you are thinking, we have no chance." Dosu then quickly said, "Master, could you please train me more?" Guren was surprised by this as her student had never truly taken an interest in training before. Guren then said, "Sure, just follow me." Guren then led her student into an open field made of concrete. Guren demonstrated a summoning jutsu. She summoned a small snake and said, "This is a summoning jutsu, it can be very useful. Your summon can be used to assist you in battle, forms of jutsu, and some animals can even train you in senjutsu." Dosu asked, "What is senjutsu?" Gyurin then waved her hand and said, "A lesson for another time. Anyway, before you can summon an animal, you must sign a contract. This contract must be signed in your blood." Gyurin then took out a scroll with a spot to sign. Dosu took out a kunai to make a small cut. However, before he could, Gyurin said, "Remember, this will be for the rest of your life, so are you sure you want to do this?" Dosu responded, "Yes, master, I do. After all, to gain power, some things must be sacrificed." Dosu then made a small cut on his finger and wrote his name on the contract. After Dosu did this, he attempted to summon a snake, but only summoned a snake egg. Dosu was shocked by this. Gyurin, however, laughed and said, "Did you really expect it to work on this first try? No, this will probably take a long time to master." Dosu then asked Gyurin, "Are there any tricks I can use to make this go faster or strategies to learn?" Gyurin chuckled and said, "No, to learn this, it will just take long, boring repetition and doing this over and over again, so you better get used to this." Gyurin expected him to crumble after this, but he began to go back to work. After about an hour of tries, Gyurin asked Dosu, "Hey kid, why do you work so hard? You don't have to put so much effort into this." Dosu then said, "Yes, I do. If there is anything I have learned, nothing is free. I don't think Lord Orochimaru told you this, but I was born here in this land of water. I believe my family were probably Kekkai Genkai users, or we were considered sympathetic or just out of fanatical hysteria, because our home was burned sometime during the purges, and I know my parents didn't survive, but I did. All I know is that sound Shinobi Kabuto saved me with his medical nin, but under these bandages are scars from the fire." Dosu then removed the bandages, showing the scars. Burned scars covered his face, and the only things that seemed to remain of a normal child was the black scruffy hair that appeared to be growing back and eyebrows on his face and his ocean blue eyes. Dosu then continued saying, "After that I was sent to Lord Orochimaru, and for healing me I allowed Lord Orochimaru to do these experiments on me." Dosu then showed the devices that allow him to use his sound wave jutsu. Dosu then said, "After that I met Kin and Zaku and trained with them, and I guess that brings us here." Dosu, after that explanation, got back to work, finally creating a small snake. The exhausted boy then collapsed. Before he could fall to the floor, Gyurin caught him and then carried him to his room. After she put him in his bed and left the room, she saw outside the room was Kabuto. Gyurin glared at him and said, "Dosu says you saved him, is that true?" Kabuto shrugged and said, Maybe I didn't. What is it to you?" Gyurin then said, "It's unlike you. You were never the person to help another person for no reason or for no gain of your own." Kabuto then smiled and said, "Gyurin, your words wound me. Anyway, you should be paying more attention to whether you can keep this base safe. You know what? S at stake if you fail." Gyurin then lowered her head and said, "Yes, Kabuto, I know." Gyurin knew if she failed, the students she cared for would probably be killed by Orochimaru, and likely she would get an inglorious death, not for being a vessel, even just to be discarded for being weak. Tayuya, Land of Sound, Southern Hideout. Tayuya met up with the rest of the Sound Four with Yugo. The first one to speak was Sakan, who said, "Hey, who is the new guy?" Tayuya responded, "He is Kimamaro's replacement." Kadamaru laughed and said, "So it's true, he up and abandoned us." Yugo spoke up saying, "He's not gone, he'll come back." Kadamaru then said, "Sure, buddy. Anyway, since he is gone now, does anyone know who will take his place as leader?" Sakan then said, "Well, clearly I should. I am stronger and faster than you guys." Jirobo then in response spoke up and said, "As long as I'm around, you won't lead me. Anyway, Lord Orochimaru chooses the leader." After he said this, almost on cue, Orochimaru came through the door. Orochimaru said, "Now congratulations on you achieving your goals. Now to address our problem, Yugo is going to replace Kimamaro on the Sound 4. In addition, I assure you he is capable. After all, his Kekkai Genkai is what your curse marks are based off. Now who will take command in the absence of Kimamaro will be Tayuya." This choice shocked everyone, especially Tayuya. Tayuya thought, "Why would he choose me? I am no stronger than the other. Why?" Kadamaru then addressed the question, asking, "Lord Orochimaru, not to question your choices, but why did you give her the leadership position?" Orochimaru then gave a smile and said, "It is quite obvious her potential is greater, and she can control Yugo. No matter, you all should be preparing for your journey. You 5 will be retrieving a Kekkai Genkai user in the Land of Wind. Prepare yourselves for this journey." Shin Uchiha, Land of Wind. Shin walked through the streets of this city in the Land of Wind with Kimimaro and Jiraiya. Shin saw as this city had seemed to have a large amount of people homeless and just living on the streets. Shin asked Jiraiya, "Why are so many on the streets? Why isn't anyone doing anything? Why do they treat this like this in normal?" Kimimaro spoke up saying, "Because it is, in places like this far away from the capital they aren't helped. Especially in the Land of Wind where most population centers are separated by large amounts of desert between different cities." Jiraiya then spoke up and said, "While it is different for different nations, this isn't uncommon. With the Land of Water separating islands causing problems, the Land of Earth is separated by mountains and lightning has a similar problem to Earth." Shin then asked Jiraiya, "What about the Land of Fire?" Jiraiya then responded, "The Land of Fire has less of those problems and more just a problem of leadership as the daimyo is incompetent and doesn't implement meaningful reform to help the countryside." Jiraiya then sighed and said, "Now let's get to the mission at hand. Shin and Kimimaro, I want you to search and see if you can find this girl with the scorch release. Apparently she has green and orange hair." Kimimaro then jokes, "So she is like Pakura?" Jiraiya then chuckled and said, "Yes, just like Pakura. Now let's go." After Jiraiya said this, the three of them separated and Shin decided to go on top of the buildings. Shin watched, trying to see if he could identify them from the roof. While Shin was doing this, he felt a strike to the back of his head. Shin saw a girl described exactly like he was supposed to find. The girl said, "Hey, if you are going to watch someone, go find somewhere else." Shin, who didn't know what to do, said, "Hey, you're the one I'm supposed to find." After he said this, the girl said, "Oh, you're the one Kabuto sent." After she said this, Shin panicked and cast a genjutsu and grabbed her before she fell to the ground. As Shin sighed with relief, Kimimaro appeared behind him and said, "What are you doing?" Shin jumped back and said, "Kimimaro, this is the girl, isn't she?" Kimimaro looked and said, "Well, she does look the part. How do you know for sure?" Shin then replied, "She mentioned Kabuto sending someone to get her." Kimimaro, after hearing that, Kimimaro got quite cold and said, "Shin, we have to get her to Jiraiya." Shin then asked, "What's the rush?" Kimimaro responded, "The sound for are coming." Naruto, Land of Fire. Naruto sat across the room from the creature that called itself Zetsu, and Naruto said, "What are you, Zetsu?" Zetsu then laughed and said, "Well, I don't exactly know. However, I know who you are, Naruto Uchiha." Naruto then said, "What do you mean? I am an Uzumaki." Zetsu responded, "Not exactly. Your mother was indeed an Uzumaki. However, her father was Izuna Uchiha, brother of Madara Uchiha. I was sent to protect you and reveal myself once you gained your Sharingan." Naruto, after hearing this, rushed over and saw indeed he had the Sharingan. After seeing this, Naruto asked Zetsu, "What should I do now?" Zetsu responded, "Technically, you can do anything. However, I wouldn't say you should openly show it to anything, as there are those who would probably distrust you more, and some would attempt to steal them from you." Naruto asked Zetsu then, "So what would you suggest?" Zetsu responded, "I would suggest you keep them secret until you are stronger, so that those who are against you won't be able to steal them." Naruto then asked Zetsu, "So what will you do?" Zetsu then said, "Nothing or everything. If you ask, I will do anything. I will train you, teach you, or leave and never return. I am at your command." Naruto then said, "Well, I am going to bed, so just do what you normally do." Zetsu responded, "Yes, master." Zetsu then disappeared through the floor as Naruto got ready for bed. Hana, Land of Wind. Hana woke up. She was tied to a tree near the exits of the town. She looked up and saw that there was the boy who had taken her. She heard the boy be called Shin. Next to him was an old man who they called Jiraiya and another boy called Kimimaro. Hana got tired of waiting and said, "Hey Shin, can you tell what's going on here? Can you tell me why I am tied up? Come and I have somewhere to be." Kimimaro then looked at her and said, "Girl, how do you know his name?" Hana then gave him a stare and said, "Listen, Kimimaro, if living on the streets taught me anything, it's how to play possum. Anyway, can you just let me go?" Shin then moved towards her and said, "Hey, listen, I know you want to get out of this village with Kabuto. However, if you trust him and Orochimaru have probably caused more problems than solved, and plus me and Kimimaro spent most of our lives under his care, and look how we turned out. Hana though guess he has a point, besides he did seem kinda sketchy. Jiraiya then moved towards her and said, "Listen kid, if you come with us I will take you to the leaf, no strings attached." Hana then said, "Sure, well the leaf sounds better than here." After she said this, Jiraiya cut her rope and she stood up. Kimimaro then said, "So we've been told you can use Scorch Release, is that true?" Hana rolled her eyes and demonstrated her ability and said, Yeah, I know, let's get out of here." Kimimaro then said, "Hold on City Rat, we can't risk the authorities, we are waiting till night." Jiraiya nodded and said, "Shin and I will take the first watch, you two get some rest. We will have a long journey ahead." Hana then went back under the tree and before she fell asleep thought, "Well, what's a little more sleep, when I wake up I'll be free." Kakashi, the Land of Wind. Kakashi and the others camped out in the desert past the Land of Wind border. The fire flickered and Kakashi looked up at Tsunade and asked him. Kakashi asked, "So why have the two of you come here for? Why do you need to Jiraiya?" Tsunade then glared at Tenzo and told Kakashi, "We have brought a proposal to give to Jiraiya, an alliance with our forces and the Leaf Village." After hearing this, Kakashi said, "Why didn't you go directly to the Leaf? Why go to Jiraiya? You should have gone to the Hokage." Tsunade then began to laugh and said, "Yes. As we all know, the Hokage always follows treaties to the world, and besides, that entire village is under the watch of Danzo Shimura. I believe that your friend there can attest to that fact." Tenzo the responded, "That is true. However, why to Jiraiya and why should we side with you?" Sinesho then responded, "Well, he is a student of the third, and he has the reputation of being trustworthy, and we have a common enemy. Orochimaru has sent shinobi to support Yagura's thugs." Tenzo then looked up and yelled at Tsunade, "How has he entered it? Who did he send in to the Land of Water?" Tsunade then responded, "For most of the conflict our rebels have prevented them from getting supplies or reinforcements outside the islands. However, Orochimaru has disrupted that by sending men and ships to one of the islands, basically creating one of his laboratories in our land." Kakashi then smiled under his mask and said, "Well, we would be happy to help you. However, it is time to get some rest. I will take the first watch." Tsunade and Tenzo then nodded as they prepared for the journey tomorrow. Tsunade Kagaya, Land of Water 5 years ago. Tsunade walked through one of the many slums in the outer islands of the Land of Water. Tsunade hadn't had a good meal in weeks. He had been living off the charity of the people, and once they found out he was a Kagaya they stopped and he had to steal. However, these meals weren't exactly filling and barely kept him going. Suddenly he heard someone yell, "There he is! The demon is over there!" Tsunade then started to make himself scarce until he realized they were talking about someone else. Then out of curiosity he looked to see what the commotion was, and he saw was the man that they were threatening was a young man about his age who was wearing brown hair and had golden eyes and wore a blue kimono. Then out of impulse Tsunade jumped in to save him. Tsunade used a water release technique and then got the boy out of there. Once they were safely away from the danger, Tsunade put the boy down. And once he put him down, the boy scowled at him and yelled at him, "What did you do that for? I could have handled it myself." Tsunade, who was now angry at the boy who he had just saved, yelled back, "Oh yeah, you had complete control. What were you going to do? Let them kill you, because that is what they were going to do to you, is kill you." The boy then sat down and asked, "Well, why did you help me?" Tsunade then sighed and said, "Well, I am a Kagaya, and also I was wondering why they would try to kill you, and why were they calling you a demon?" The boy then sighed and said, "The name is Utakata, and I am the Jinchuriki of the Six Tails." Tsunade then laughed and said, "Well, that explains why they are attacking you. Anyway, do you have anywhere to go?" Utakata then said, "Well, yeah. Hey, wait, why aren't you running away? Shouldn't you be terrified by me? You know the Jinchuriki like the Mizukage, also I told you my name, shouldn't you tell me yours?" Tsunade then laughed and said, "Well, you don't seem too scary, so I am not too worried about you, and the name is Tsunade. Anyway, can you take me to wherever you are staying?" Utakata then shrugged and said, "Fine, I guess you can see whatever." Tayuya, Land of Wind. Tayuya sat with the other four watching as the sun went down. Tayuya then said to Kidamaru, "So you know the plan, right?" Kidamaru gave a small laugh and then said, "Tear the city up until we find the kid." Tayuya then said, "Now we can't let anyone see our faces, so if anyone sees you they must die. Understood?" Yugo then said, "All I care about is bringing Kimimaro back." Yugo then began to transform and Tayuya put her flute to her lips and gave him the command to follow her order, and then she summoned her Genjutsu demon summons and headed to the city. She then told them to tear apart the city to find the Kekei Genkai user. She then quickly moved across the city watching as the creatures destroyed buildings, and she thought this reminded her of what her parents told her of the Second Shinobi War, of how powerful shinobi could destroy buildings with jutsu and animal summons. As she thought about this, she realized she would need to work fast as one of those people were in the city, Jiraiya of the Sannin. She then moved on trying to use her latent sensory abilities to find the girl they were looking for. However, as she looked for her, she found that she was with another, one she cared for and who had betrayed her and their village, Kimimaro Kagaya. Kimimaro Kagaya, Land of Wind. Kimimaro ran through the streets with Hana, the two of them trying to escape the city. As the two of them ran, Hana said to him, "So who are these people, and are they really just here to take me with them, and shouldn't we do something?" Kimimaro then said, "They are the Sound Four, and they are here for you, and this is probably because of their desperation. Their actions appear to show that, and the longer you stay the longer they will too, so we should try to get out of here as soon as possible." The two of them ran further into the city. They began to see the exit when a demonic being appeared in front of them and tried to strike them with its club. Kimimaro, after seeing the beast, thought, "Tayuya must be the one controlling this beast." Then a bit away, Kimimaro saw that girl a bit away and she said, "Damn it, Yugo, get him." Yugo then, in his transformed form, ran at Kimimaro and tried to strike him with a transformed limb, and then Kimimaro blocked it with his own bones. After this, Yugo jumped back and said, Why did you leave us?" Kimimaro then gave a saddened sigh and said, "I didn't have a choice, and besides I am better out here. Join us, Yugo. I know someone who might be able to actually help you with your power." Tayuya then saw this was going nowhere and used her flute to compel him to attack Kimimaro. Kimimaro then had to jump back to find an escape path because Yugo's arm was about to strike him, and then he jumped, and when Yugo's fist hit the ground he left a crater, and after that attack Yugo jumped up, reaching Kimimaro and striking him in the chest. As Kimimaro hit the ground, he was thankful that his bones were so strong, because if it wasn't for them he probably would have lost a few ribs. Kimimaro then used Shadow Clone Jutsu to have them distract Yugo so he could think of a plan. Yugo then easily dealt with the trio, and after that a large red sphere went towards Yugo, which he easily dodged. Then when they all looked and saw it was Hana, who said, "Just because I don't know as many jutsu doesn't mean I am out of this fight." After this surprise entrance, Kimimaro went towards her and said, "Can you distract him? I have a plan, but I need you to buy some time first." Hana responded, "Sure, I can do that." Yugo then charged at her and she dodged his attacks. Then she created two more of her spheres and shot then at Yugo, who then dodged the projectiles. Then Tayuya, who was a distance away, then laughed at her and said, "Ha ha ha, you can't even get a solid hit on Yugo. If you can't land a hit on him, what's the point of you even trying to oppose us?" Hana grunted and said, "Didn't Orochimaru tell you why I am so important, why he wants me so much? Well, I have Scorch Release, which if those things I've been launching hit the target, they will incinerate them. That is why he wants it. This is why Pakura was so deadly." Hana then thought to herself, "Granted, I don't think I've had any practice with technique or anyone ever gotten his by it, but they don't need to know about that." Hana then continued, "And besides, my job here wasn't to defeat you, no matter how satisfying that may be. My job is to delay you so that Kimimaro can defeat you too." The two of them, who had seemed to have forgotten that he existed and looked to see that he had transformed, his skin had darkened. He had large spinal bones sticking out of his back and markings covering his face and a bone drill covering his arm. In a low tone, Kimimaro looked up and said, "Now time to end this, Yugo." Kakashi Hatake, Land of Wind. Kakashi and the three others that he was traveling with had come into the city earlier that day. However, that night they had been awakened by the attack of the Sound Four. Kakashi and Tsunade went out to try to find the assailants, while the other two went to see if they could find survivors. Kakashi and Tsunade, after some time of traveling through the ruined city, when they found a teenage boy who appeared to have someone on his back. The boy had fair skin and had blue hair. The other person was another boy the same age. However, he had multiple limbs and dark skin. However, they had one thing in common: they both wore a common uniform and they both wore headbands that Kakashi hadn't seen before. Kakashi then spoke to them asking, "Who are you two?" The first boy then gave a smile and said, "Wouldn't you like to know? And that is why I won't tell you." The boy then signaled to the multi-armed boy and said, "Now let's get them." The multi-armed boy then created what appeared to be some sort of spider web and tried to get Kakashi attached to it. However, he dodged it and then moved around the boy and tried to hit the other boy with a Chidori, as he appeared to be the brains of this operation. However, as it appeared to be that the body on his back was someone else, as it began to move, first detaching from him and then jumping behind Kakashi, getting onto his back, pinning him to the ground, and then he began doing something. To Kakashi, he said, "You should be more careful with your opponent when you don't know who you are fighting if you don't know their techniques. Now time to fuse." The boy then appeared to be fusing their bodies together. The boy then continued, "My Kekkei Genkai allows me to fuse my body with any victim, and there is nothing you can do to undo this without me consenting to it, and I find that quite unlikely." Kakashi cursed to himself, as he thought their youth would translate to inexperience and that they wouldn't have anything up their sleeves. However, before anything else could happen, a fury of bone weapons appeared to be heading towards the two of them, causing the boy to detach himself, and Kakashi barely made it out of the way. After this, Tsunade showed himself and he berated Kakashi, saying, "Kakashi, you became carless? Guess that's what the leaf can do." To Kakashi then sighed in annoyance. The first boy then said, "Oh, there is another Kagaya like Kimimaro." Tsunade then said, "Another survived." The boy then said, "Soon he will be the only one. Kidamaru, get that one down." The boy then, in unison with the other one, tried to hit Tsunade, who dodged, and then after he landed, Kidamaru tried to hit him with his web. However, that wasn't successful. The second half of that boy then tried to trap Kakashi again, with less successful results that last time. That ended with Kakashi dodging him and kicking him in the chest, which he could hear a rib cracking and him being launched back. The two of them then entered a taijutsu duel, which ended in a stalemate. The boy Kidamaru and the first boy tried to work together to defeat Tsunade, with very few successes and many injuries and open wounds. As the duels continued on and the three of them regrouped, the first boy then said to the second, "Can you call them back? We need to plan for an escape." The second one then nodded. And then four shinobi in black garb showed themselves, and the first boy said, "Delay those two." The three of them then made an escape, as Kakashi and Tsunade were delayed with the unknown shinobi that interrupted the duel to aid in their escapes. Kakashi said to Tsunade when it ended, "I bet those three were the leaders of this raid." Tsunade then sighed in annoyance and said, "I believe they are, and they mentioned another of my clan. I must find out more about this. And if he is being held captive, I will save him." Kakashi then asked Tsunade, "And what if he doesn't want to join you?" Tsunade then responded in a cruel tone, "Then I will drag him back until he does want to join me back home. I am his clan leader, he doesn't have much of a choice in that matter." Kakashi sighed and thought, just like any other clan, are their leaders always this stubborn and stupid? Kakashi then said, "Let's rejoin the other two. The battle is probably entering its conclusion." Tsunade then nodded and said, "Yes, that probably is true, and knowing Kahayo, it is very likely they will need our help in whatever they are doing." Hana, Land of Wind. Hana had become very exhausted by this point in the fight. She could feel broken bones in her attempts to hold off Yugo. However, her efforts had appeared to have worked. As she looked back, she had seen Kimimaro had transformed. Hana asked Kimimaro, "So did it work?" Kimimaro then nodded and ran towards Yugo at speeds that Yugo couldn't react to. Kimimaro then tried to strike Yugo with an arm which had transformed into what seemed to be a drill made of bone. Hana then gave a small laugh and asked, "What is this power? It doesn't seem like any technique I have heard about." Kimimaro then coldly said, "This is the power of a stage 2 curse mark." Yugo then transformed one of his limbs and then tried to strike Kimimaro with it. However, before he could do so, Kimimaro blocked his arm with his own transformed bone. Yugo then jumped back, and Kimimaro then appeared to take out his spine bone, and he used it to grab Yugo as it wrapped around his chest and pulled him towards him and then stabbed him with his bone arm. Tayuya then saw the fight wasn't going well for them, so she recalled her demonic summons, and when it returned it tried to crush Kimimaro with its club. However, Kimimaro was able to jump out of the way, and then he dashed of the monster and slashed one of its feet, causing it to begging to fall to the ground. As this began to happen, Kimimaro shot bones out of his fingers into its body, then that action caused it to collapse. Yugo then tried to catch Kimimaro off guard with a strike to his chest. However, Kimimaro was able to use his rib bones to block the strike from Yugo in this case. Taking advantage of him being in this state, Kimimaro kicked Yugo, causing him to be propelled into one of the buildings. Tayuya then went to Yugo and said, "We aren't going to win this fight, we have to retreat for right now, got it?" Yugo then nodded in response. Taiyuya then summoned two demonic creatures to block their escape, which was successful as after Kimimaro had collapsed due to exhaustion. After this, he had transformed back into his normal self. Hana grabbed him and began to Jiraiya. As Hana traveled through the city, she saw that the Sound Four didn't seem to leave survivors in this attack. At that appeared to be left was shattered buildings and the bodies that were left in the wake of this attack. Hana thought to herself how there is no way she could still live in this city. For there was no way anyone would come back to live in this city, as even without this the leadership didn't seem to care about this place, so they might use this as a reason to just abandon this place like many places that were abandoned as the end of the last shinobi war near the border were. Thankfully, after much traveling through this, she was able to find Jiraiya and Shin. As she reached him, she placed him on the ground and told Jiraiya, "He was able to protect me from our assailants. However, it seems to have exhausted him." After this, someone approached them. This person who looked like Kimimaro said, "So this I am suspecting is the other Kagaya I've heard about. Now I believe we have much to discuss." Jiraiya. Jiraiya, Land of Wind. Jiraiya held an unconscious Kimimaro in his arms. He then looked at Hana and asked, "What happened? Why is he so low on chakra?" Hana then responded, "We were fighting these two. One was a girl our age who had red hair, and another was a boy who had orange hair, and was able to transform into this beast, and Kimimaro's fight with that kid seems to have taken a lot out of him." After she said this, someone who looked a lot like Kimimaro appeared before them and then said, "So I am guessing they were part of the group me and Kakashi fought. I am glad at least that he isn't a weak member of my clan." Jiraiya then looked at Naruto and said, "What makes you think I will hand him over to you?" Naruto then said, "Well, he is of my clan, and I can best train him in his Kekkai Genkai." Jiraiya then said, "In most cases that would be the case, however this time we have to take into account this." Jiraiya then showed a curse mark on Kimimaro. Naruto then said, "What is that?" Jiraiya responded, "Well, that is a gift from Orochimaru. It is called a curse mark, and it can slowly take over the mind of the user. However, it must be used for this to occur." Jiraiya then put a seal over it, and Jiraiya then continued, "This will prevent it from getting worse. Now can you take us to your allies?" Naruto sighed and said, "Very well." Naruto then began leading them to the three others. Once the three of them made it to the others, Jiraiya saw a woman who wore the same garb as Naruto and wore a Mist Village headband. Next to her was Kakashi, who he had a few encounters with due to Jiraiya's spy work and work with the Umbu, and another person who he hadn't known as well, but had heard about him by Kakashi. Kakashi had called him Tenzo. However, he had been originally from Root, so no one truly knew anything about him. Jiraiya then said to them, "So what's the reason for the gathering of a group of such colorful characters?" Naruto spoke first. "This can be best described as an alliance of convenience. I have no doubt your network has heard of the civil war in the Land of Water. And as I am with the rebels, the council we have created has a question for your village, and we have a proposal for the Hokage, an alliance between us." Jiraiya then responded, "Why didn't you just give it to those two? Why to me?" Seneisho then responded, "The council barely trusts the Leaf. They however place more trust in a student of the third than an Umbu who might have ties to Shimura, and besides we have a common enemy." Jiraiya then raised an eyebrow and said, "And who would that be?" Naruto then responded, "Orochimaru. He has been working with the other side of the mist and has laboratories in their territory. We would be willing to work with you to destroy one if you come with me." After Naruto said this, Tenzo asked, "Why should we trust you? How do we know you won't try to kill him?" Naruto then laughed and said, "You really think I can kill one of the Sannin? Then you are either overstating my abilities or understating his." Jiraiya then nodded and said to Kakashi, "Hey, I will be sending a messenger toad with you two back to the village with the message. Can you make sure it gets there with the message?" Kakashi then nodded and Jiraiya spoke to the group. "Well, things seem clear now. I will go with you too, and Kakashi and Tenzo will go back to the Leaf." Naruto then nodded and said, "Now let's prepare for the journey home." Guren, Land of Water. Guren had spent the last week intensely training Dosu in taijutsu training and getting better at chakra control and using the weapons that Orochimaru had welded into his body. Guren asked Dosu, "So where exactly did you come from?" Dosu then asked Guren, "What do you mean by that?" Guren then said, "Well, I wanted to teach you some elemental jutsu. However, we don't exactly have the paper to find out your nature, so I was thinking maybe if you tell me where you were originally from I can guess what nature you have." Dosu then sighed and said, well, all I remember is that my family was from the land of water. We had been in one of the more wealthy parts of the land of water, and that our home was burnt in retaliation for something. I believe it was due to protecting a Kekii Genkai user, which gave me burns, and that is why I wear these bandages. After that, one of Orochimaru's men saved me and I believe brought me to the land of sound. Gurren then sighed and thought, well, I've heard stories like this before. Gurren then said, well, since you are from the land of water, you probably have water release. I will teach you 2 jutsu now. The first jutsu is water clone. Dosu then asked Gurren, water clone? Is it anything like the shadow clone? Gurren then responded, in some ways just like that jutsu. This jutsu is physical and can help you in contact. However, this clone must use at least 1/10 of your chakra, and depending on how much you put in will decide how much strength it has. However, I would recommend never putting more of 1/5 in. Dosu then nodded and began working on this technique. After the day had begun to end, Dosu had begun to get used to creating water clones. Gurren, seeing it was getting late, said to him, hey, you can go get ready to sleep. We will continue this tomorrow. Dosu nodded and began to leave. Gurren was on her way to her own room and saw Kabuto, who was in the hallway. Gurren glared at him and said, so how did the Sound 4's mission go? Kabuto then sighed and said, poorly. The child escaped with the help of Jiraiya and Kakashi. Apparently Kimimaro was there too. Gurren chuckled and said, so he did betray us. Kabuto then said, there were also mist rebels there, so I would be careful if I were you. Kabuto then began to leave and Gurren thought to herself, this situation just keeps getting better and better. Sanaito Kagaya, Land of Fire. Sanaito sat by a fire. It was late in the night. The 4 of them had stopped near the coastline, for they would have to continue their journey across the water the next day. Sanaito then said, all right, let's get to sleep. I will take the first watch. Jiraiya then responded, we don't have to go to sleep immediately. Let's talk a little. I barely know about you too. Sanaito then sighed and said, fine, if that's what you want, I will tell you about my story. Land of Water, years ago. Sanaito sat in a makeshift house with Utakata. Sanaito asked Utakata, so why are you here? Utakata then gave a confused look to Sanaito and asked him, excuse me, what do you mean by that? Sanaito then replied, well, it's no secret that Yagura hasn't been idle. I would have thought that he would be trying to train you. Utakata then gave a saddened look and responded, well, you can't say that he didn't try that. However, he wasn't able to hold me forever. After I escaped, I came here, and the villagers here have an agreement that if I don't go near them, they stay away from me. Sanaito then chuckled and said, well, that sounds like a pretty good agreement. Does anyone ever come here? Utakata sighed and said, well, there was someone here before me, and let's just say she didn't leave. Then as they were speaking, a young girl about their age with red hair appeared. The girl then said, hey Utakata, who is this? Utakata then sighed and said, well, this is Sanaito, and Sanaito, this is Anoka. Anoka then said, so Sanaito, from you looks I bet you're a Kagaya. I thought that Yagura had killed all of your kind. Sanaito then glared at her and said, we aren't so easy to kill, and besides, from your looks and your chakra, I can tell you are an Uzumaki. I thought the mist and lightning killed your clan too. Anoka sighed and said, well, just like you said, we aren't so easy to kill either. Anoka then sighed and said, well, I used to have this place all to myself before someone came. I've been hiding from Yagura. You know, any village would kill to get their hands on a Uzumaki. Sanaito then nodded and said, so do you have the powers of the Uzumaki? Anoka nodded and said, yeah, I have the adamantine chains. I also have great sensory skills. Anoka chuckled and said, my parents had even called me a prodigy. Imagine that. Anyway, what about you? Do you have your clan's Kekii Genkai? Sanaito then nodded and demonstrated pulling a bone out. Anoka grinned and said, well, now that's something. Utakata, who by this point was annoyed by both of them, said, all right, you two. Let's go to sleep. We can't be sleepy if an attack comes. Sanaito nodded and Anoka said, fine with me. The 2 of them left and Sanaito looked for the most comfortable patch of grass to sleep and thought, this might be okay. Naruto Uzumaki, Land of Fire. It was around midday in the Leaf Village, and Naruto had been training in one of the many unused training fields in the Leaf Village. Naruto had been doing combat training with his Zetsu for the last week. Zetsu had been trying to teach him taijutsu chakra control exercises. Naruto had thought he had the upper hand on Zetsu when he disappeared into the ground and reappeared behind him and turned his arm into a blade and put it to Naruto's neck and said, "Well, Naruto, it seems as if I have defeated you once again." Naruto then sighed as Zetsu pulled back his arm and said, "Really? Can't you go easy on me? I don't have much training anyway." Zetsu gave a small laugh and said, "Nope. And besides, I don't believe once you are a shinobi anybody will give you a break." Naruto then sighed again and said, "Well, I guess not. Anyway, when can you teach me a new jutsu?" Zetsu then responded, "Not for a while. You need to improve your chakra control before you can do that, and besides, for now we should focus on taijutsu." Naruto sighed and said, "Okay. Well, can we take a break? We have been doing this all day." Zetsu then could sense two people coming and said, "Well, sure. But we will continue this later." Zetsu then went into the ground and disappeared. Naruto thought to himself, where does he go when he disappears? Just as this happened, two people appeared before Naruto, Kakashi and a young boy who had albino skin and the whitest hair he had ever seen. Kakashi then said, "There you are, Naruto. How have you been and why are you out here by yourself?" Naruto then said, "I've been pretty good and I am out here training. Hey, who is this boy you have with you?" Kakashi had a smile appear under his mask and said, "Well, keep training hard, and this is Shin. Jiraiya rescued him, and he is now going to be joining us in the Leaf Village for a while." Naruto thought, so that's why he hasn't been here. He then smiled and put out his hand and said, "Hello, Shin. It's nice to meet you." Shin then shook his hand and said, "Yes. I hope to enjoy it here, and Jiraiya has told me a bit about you. He seems to care about you a lot." Naruto's smile then grew and said, "Well, that's nice to hear. I've missed him, but if he is helping people like you, I guess it is worth it." Shin then smiled and said, "Yeah, I suppose. Hey, Kakashi, shouldn't we be going to the Hokage?" Kakashi sighed and said, "Well, I suppose we should. Take care, Naruto." Naruto then smiled and said, "I will. Don't worry about me." The two left, and then Naruto thought, what should I do now? Maybe I will see how Sasuke is doing. Naruto then began heading into the village to continue his day. Guren, land of water. Guren and Dosu sat in the training hall. They had been working all morning, so they had begun having a break. Guren asked Dosu, "Hey Dosu, what do you know about the technique of chakra scalpel?" Dosu sighed and then said, "Well, from what I know, it is a technique which is used mostly by medical shinobi, which uses this advanced form of chakra control to be able to bypass someone's chakra network so that the person can heal them directly." Guren then said, "That is correct. The technique has also been used, though, to be able to deactivate someone's chakra network in a fight. Due to this, I was wondering if we could use this to combine with your sound weapons, using the scalpel to be able to disrupt key parts of the network instead of just a general region that it has been used for in the past." Dosu then responded, "I would be willing to try this, but first I will need to master the chakra scalpel." Guren then got up and began leading Dosu to another room. As they began walking, Guren said, "Good thing I've been training you extensively with chakra control." Dosu then nodded and asked Guren, "Master, where are you taking me?" Guren responded, "Well, we are going to be seeing a body of a recently deceased member of the staff of this base, unless you have a problem with working on dead bodies here." Dosu shook his head and said, "No, I do not. On the way to learning new techniques, we can't shirk away even if it may seem disgusting or questionable." Guren smiled at this response, and then they entered the room. Guren then said, "All right, now we are going to begin. First, you are going to have to memorize where the chakra points are, so you need to know where to shut down." Dosu then nodded and got to work. This work would take a long time to complete, however, this is the beginning. Sanaito Kagaya, land of fire border. Sanaito Kagaya had finished waking up all of their crew, as they would now have to make it across for their expedition into the land of water. Kahayo rowed the boat as they moved across the water. As they began making it across the water, Sanaito saw that Kimimaro was staring at him. Sanaito then asked the boy, "So how did you survive our attack on the Mist Village? I had heard that everyone had been slaughtered by the mist." Kimimaro then chuckled and said, "Not everyone. I survived, and after the assault was picked up by Orochimaru and eventually by Jiraiya here, it also appears that he plans to train me. Besides, how did you survive the assault yourself?" Sanaito nodded and said, Well, my father had me whisked away before the assault just in case it had failed, just in case we needed to rebuild. Anyway, I am glad I am not the last of the clan anymore." After he said this, Naruto looked over the side of the boat and said, "We are here." Then seconds after he said that, a large ship appeared over the side. This ship was so large that it made it so that their small ship looked tiny in comparison. Seconds later, 2 mist shinobi landed on the boat, rocking it a bit. After that, Naruto said, "We have returned now, can we be brought aboard?" One of the mist shinobi then nodded and a ladder was tossed down and they all climbed up to the top. As they began to observe the ship, seeing this wasn't just a small ragtag vessel but a fully maintained navy. This was well organized and well prepared for battle. While Kimimaro was just amazed, as he had never seen a vessel like this. On the other hand, there was Jiraiya, who went over to Naruto and asked him, "How haven't I heard about this? I didn't know you people had become this well organized." Naruto then chuckled and said, "Well, that was partially the point. The point is that only we know what is going on and out. I had been in charge of counterintelligence to keep everything secret until I wanted others to know. I really hope we can have a fruitful partnership." Then a woman with red hair and a hunter mask came and said, "Well, we will see about that. You still have to do your end of the bargain after all the effort we put into bringing you here." Naruto then gave a genuine smile and said, "Anoka, you don't have to hide behind a mask. You are among friends." Anoka then chuckled and took it off and gave him a big hug. She then said, "Sorry, had to keep it on before, as protocol and all that bullshit. Good to see that you made it back." Naruto then responded, "Takes more than what I saw to kill me." Anoka then chuckled and said, "Yeah, I know that more than anything. Anyway, so this is the guy we are putting all of our faith in." Naruto then nodded. And Jiraiya interjected and said, "Yeah, anyway, when am I meeting your leaders?" Anoka then said, "Slow down. We are heading there, but we have to first make sure we aren't being followed or anything." Jiraiya then nodded and said, "Well, if it's going to take a while, I'll take a nap, just show me to my quarters." Anoka nodded and signaled to someone to take him there. Anoka then asked Naruto, "So this is who all of our faith is going in?" Naruto then sighed and said, "He's stronger than he looks, and besides we are kinda out of options." Anoka shrugged and said, "Well, if you say so. Anyway, let's get to work." Black Zetsu, Land of Water. Black Zetsu met with Obito in the cave which had once been used by Madara before he died. The two of them hadn't used this place since that fossil had died. Obito had arrived in his black cloak and orange spiral mask. Black Zetsu said to him, "So what is the progress with the Akatsuki so far?" Obito responded, "They are still accumulating funds, however soon they will begin hunting for the tailed beasts. However, I did not ask you to come here for a status reports. I came to ask if our plans change with that Naruto and that white Zetsu which has decided to attach itself to him. Do you want me to eliminate them?" Zetsu responded to this by saying, "Not at this moment yet. I am curious to see what comes of this. Perhaps this Zetsu could help us and bring Naruto to our side, and in that case our tailed beast collection will become a much easier process." Obito then asked him, "And if he doesn't, what if he becomes a threat, or what if this Zetsu begins to reveal our secrets to the leaf?" Zetsu then chuckled and said, "Well, if that begins to happen, I believe taking down one Zetsu won't be too hard for the all-powerful Madara to kill." Obito then said, "Yes, I believe I could do that. And what should we do in regards to the civil war in the Mist Village?" Black Zetsu then responded, "Let's monitor the situation for now. We should keep the bloodshed going on as long as we can. However, if our puppet begins to be nearing death, we should be ready to scoop him up and extract the beast." Obito nodded and went into the Kamui dimension and disappeared. After this, White Zetsu asked Black Zetsu, "So is there anything special about this Zetsu? I thought for sure you were going to sign his death warrant there." Black Zetsu chuckled and said, "Just a theory I have, but one I plan to test soon." Black Zetsu then entered the earth and left. Naruto Kagaya, Land of Water. 2 years ago. Naruto, Utakata, and Anoka had been living together for a few months now, and by this point many things had happened in the Land of Water. From the little news they had heard about, they learned that Yagura was attempting to centralize power around him, and that angered those around him. In response to this, he attempted to purge possible enemies he feared, which, unlike the ones on the clans which had been supported by his power base, this had only the support of the Hunter Nin, which ended up botching the operation. Those who survived the purge ended up being the survivors of the purges, and many jonin and high-level shinobi, and most importantly the Hozuki clan followed her, which was a major blow as they made the backbone of the village's shinobi forces. However, Yagura still had what remained of the seven swordsmen. While the three of them felt pretty indifferent to what was going on, this had made their lives much harder as the villagers became more hostile than they were before, and what seemed to remain of Yagura's forces seemed to be trying to assert authority in the region. Sanaido asked Utakata, "So how's our supplies doing?" Utakata sighed and responded, "We are actually running low. One of us are going to have to go into the village." Anoka said, "Yeah, well, that's going to be a problem. With Yagura's men in the village, someone well known like Utakata will be noticed, and my red hair is a giveaway that I am an Uzumaki." Sanarito then said, "Well, perhaps I can go." Anoka laughed and said, "Yeah, with your pale skin, yeah right?" Sanarito then responded, "Well, I have a plan. I know a jutsu that could prevent them from seeing my physical appearance. Unless they have a sensor, I should be fine." Utakata asked, "Are you sure this will work?" Sanaido nodded and said, "How do you think I survived so long?" Anoka then shrugged and said, "Well, it's your life. Just so you know, if we get captured or anything, it's on you." Sanarito then nodded and began making his way to the village with the appearance of a common villager with a cloak on. When Sanaido made his way to the entrance, he saw how things had changed. There were now walls preventing anyone from entering outside the main entrance, and along the walls there were watchtowers with shinobi wearing hunter nin masks. As Sanarito approached the entrance, he saw there was one of those shinobi there, and he was stopped by him, and he asked Sanarito, "What is your purpose here?" Sanarito responded, "I am here to get food for my family. We live a little far off from this village." The shinobi nodded and told him, "On your way out, you will have to undertake a scan by our sensor to make sure you aren't hiding anything." Sanarito nodded and said, "Understood." As Sanarito walked in, he thought, "Shit, I'll have to think of something when I leave." As Sanaido walked through the streets, he saw much had changed as there were far fewer people out and about, and throughout the streets were signs and banners espousing how great Yagura and his regime are. Sanaido looked and saw one of the vendors and went up and said, "I need supplies for a week." The vendor told him, "Well, that's quite expensive, it'll cost you." Sanaido then gave almost the entire bag of Ryo Anoka gave him. The merchant then nodded and gave him the supplies. Sanaido then asked, "What's going on here?" The merchant then said, "Well, these shinobi have moved into our village and seem to have put us under military lockdown. The guy in charge seems to be a censor nin. Apparently he was part of the shinobi who stopped the Kagaya uprising. They seem to have taken over the inn as their barracks." Sanaido asked him, "Is there anywhere I can stay the night?" The merchant then said, "Sure, I have a little place in the village. It's not that nice, but it's a roof to put over your head." Sanarito then said, "I'll take it." Sanarito gave what remained of his coin to the merchant and went to where it was, keeping his supplies in a ceiling scroll. Once he got there, the place turned out to be a little shack. The place had a wooden roof, a mediocre bed, a desk to work at, and a restroom. Sanarito sat in the chair and thought, "I won't be able to leave the same way I came in. Maybe I could start a fire at the inn being used as a barracks, and that could distract the shinobi so I can make my getaway." Sanarito then plopped himself on the bed and thought, "It should go well as long as that censor doesn't find me." After this, Sanaido laid down trying to think about how his life got to this point. When he was young, he wasn't running from the authorities and trying to just stay alive. When he was a kid, his life hadn't been perfect, but better than this. He remembered, although he hadn't exactly had a normal childhood, as a lot of his time had been spent training for his role as the next head of the clan. This especially got much harder after his Kekkei Genkai had been awakened, with his father having him work deep into the night to hone it and have complete control of it. In addition, his mother had him become familiarized in chakra control and the political side of the village. Sanaido, though, now that none of that truly matters. All that matters now is that he is able to survive to the next day and the day after that, and that his only job now was quite simple: to survive. Kimimaro Kagaya, land of water coast. Kimimaro was awakened by Jiraiya when morning broke. Jiraiya opened the door to the room he had been staying in. Jiraiya told him, "Hey, get up, we've made it there." Kimimaro rubbed his eyes and then quickly got into his robe. Kimimaro then followed Jiraiya to the deck and saw that Sanaido and Hanako had already been up. Kimimaro asked Sanaido, "So what is going on?" Tsunade responded, "We have arrived. Soon we will be docking and going on to the island where the leadership has been staying." Then Kimimaro saw that past the fog had been an island which had appeared to have contained a large island. This island seemed to have many large boats similar to the one they had been staying on, and each of them appeared to have a different crest on its flag. When they began to dock on the island, Tsunade pulled down a rope and they began to start going off the boat one by one, with Anoka being the last one to get off. Once they were off, Kimimaro saw this wasn't just a small outpost or base or settlement but a military command center. As he went past what appeared to be a barracks and smithery, he also saw what appeared to be a communications and intel tower and a dining area set up over a few tents. Kimimaro saw a few rows of tents where he guessed people were sleeping. He saw while most had no symbols, as they were probably for those without a clan, but some had banners like those of the Terumi clan, Hozuki clan, the Yuki, and even the Kagaya clan. Kimimaro was surprised his clan was even getting treated well, as many viewed them as bloodthirsty monsters. However, he guessed people cared a lot less about those things when you are fighting a civil war. When they entered the main tent, Kimimaro saw a war room. He saw many people who he remembered Orochimaru speaking about, like Ao of the Byakugan, a skilled warrior in his own right who had apparently taken a Byakugan in the last war. Orochimaru had said that none really known how he had gotten it. However, he believed either it was from a branch family member, which would have meant taking it while that member lived, or from a main house member, which would be one of the most impressive deeds a shinobi of no prominent clan from the mist has done. There was also the leader Mei Terumi, who was the leader of this revolution, and Orochimaru had praised her skills, however had also talked of wishing to test on her. She had both boil and lava release, and Orochimaru had thought using her could help crack their secrets. As Jiraiya entered, Mei Terumi said, "So we finally received the famous Jiraiya of the Sannin. Ready to begin." Jiraiya smiled and said, "Gladly." Tsunade Kagaya, land of water 2 years ago. Tsunade woke up early in the morning to pouring rain. It was before the sun had left the small house that he had been staying in. Outside most were asleep, so it was much easier to maneuver around the village than it was the other day. When Tsunade made it to the place that the Mist Shinobi was, he saw that the place appeared to be a very large inn. Outside it appeared to be a few shinobi who had the hunter nin masks, which appeared to become commonplace among the shinobi nowadays. Tsunade looked and saw that there also seemed to be shinobi on the roof. However, he eventually found the blind spots in the building. Tsunade took out these explosive tags that could be detonated on command given to him by Anoka. Tsunade thought to himself, "Whenever I get back I have to thank Anoka for giving me this. These are extremely useful." Tsunade then began putting the tags on the support beams at the bottom of the structure. However, he realized that he would have to deal with guards which were guarding them. Tsunade created 3 water clones and gave them each a bone glade from his body, and then gave them a tag so they could give them simultaneous so they wouldn't raise suspicion from the others guarding it. Tsunade's water clones then went to the locations and slit the throats of the guards and hid them well enough to make sure that they wouldn't be found by the other guards. After Tsunade's clones had completed their job given by Tsunade, they dissipated into water. Once Tsunade was a fair distance away, he detonated the explosive tags and watched as the support of the building began to collapse. He heard as many screamed as they were killed by the building crushing them. Tsunade began to leave as fast as he could, hoping that they would be too busy trying to save those inside the building to try to search for the culprit. Tsunade jumped from the many buildings and homes as he drew closer and closer to the walls that were at the end of the village. Tsunade could see the top of the towers darting the walls when 2 shinobi came after him. Tsunade had to dash to the left when the larger of the 2 took a swipe at him that nearly hit him. Once he had stopped, he saw that the 2 of them appeared to be a jonin and a genin. The jonin appeared to be at least 20 years older than him. The man had white hair and appeared to be a veteran, and the genin appeared to be only 15 years old and had brown hair and blue eyes. Tsunade said, "Damn it, I thought I could have gone out unseen." The younger one laughed and said, "Yeah, that's nearly impossible with sensors as good as us. Did you really think you could suddenly take out 4 shinobi without us noticing and not notice the quick movement?" The older one said, "And besides, I wouldn't be able to forget a chakra like yours. You are clearly a Kagaya. I can't forget one of your kind." Tsunade then said, "So you've known us?" The older shinobi laughed and said, "Know you? I've lost track of how many of your putrid kind I erased that night. However, it appears I have one more to deal with." The older shinobi then created 2 water clones from the rain and took out a Tanto and charged him. Sanaido fought off the water clones, and although the fighting was rough, he was able to dispose of the water clones. Sadly, the real shinobi was a much different story. He had near constant clashes with his bones and the man's Tanto. As they dueled, the man said, "How does it feel? Your clan is nothing more than a memory. A deranged memory which history will forget like many others. You won't even get the privilege the Uzumakis have of being remembered for their fuinjutsu." Sanaido jumped back and said, "Why do you care so much?" The man then said, "I just want to finish my job." Sanaido then said, "Well then sadly this one will be unfinished." Sanaido then made blades out of the rain and hit the younger one. This caused his opponent to flinch, and he used this opening to plunge a blade into his chest and make his getaway. The man was clearly still alive, but all he needed to do right now was escape. Now that no one was there, he was able to escape this village to his allies outside with his supplies. Naruto Uzumaki, Land of Fire. Naruto was in a training field in the middle of the morning. The area was covered with kunais and shurikens that he had been using in training with Zetsu. He had been trying to get Naruto to activate his Sharingan, as Naruto hadn't been able to use it at will yet. Naruto was panting. He was exhausted from all of this training. Naruto said to Zetsu, "Can we stop now? I think I've done enough for right now." Zetsu responded, "Naruto, for if you want to be able to become Hokage, you are going to have to train like this." Naruto responded, "Yeah, well, I need rest too. I am only human." Zetsu sighed and said, "Naruto, do you know the kind of danger you are in with the Sharingan?" Naruto shrugged and said, "Not really." Zetsu then shook his head and said, "The Sharingan can be stolen. If they take those eyes, they will be able to use them for their own uses. This is why the Hyugas covet their eyes so much, and this is why I am training so hard. It's so no one can ever take them. Additionally, so that you can fulfill your legacy as the heirs of the Uchiha and Uzumaki clans." Naruto then responded, "Well, I haven't been able to really use them, so it's pointless to try and teach me that, and only me and you know of it, so I think we are safe for now." After a stern look from Zetsu, Naruto gave a nervous laugh and said, "Can you teach me some of the Uzumaki stuff? I can actually learn?" Zetsu responded, "Well, that would be hard, as most of their things were some form of fuinjutsu, and I am not knowledgeable in that department. A better person to go for one that would be to talk to Jiraiya." Naruto sighed and muttered, "Yeah, if he was ever here." Zetsu heard that and said, "Jiraiya is on a mission for the village, and he can teach you as soon as he returns." Zetsu saw Naruto not appreciating the answer to his question, so he thought of a solution and put his hand on Naruto's head and said, "Well, if you want a break, here's what I will give. You have to learn about someone from the village." Naruto looked up and said, "Yeah, well, who is it?" Zetsu smiled and said, "Anko Mitarashi. Jiraiya, Land of Water." Jiraiya entered the building where the leadership of the rebellion appeared to be located. Jiraiya saw in the center of the room appeared to be a woman. She appeared to be quite young and had auburn hair that was in a top knot, covered one of her eyes and went down to her ankles. She also wore a blue dress. Next to her was a man with blue hair and wore a kimono. This man additionally had one eye covered. Jiraiya thought to himself that this man was probably Ao. Sanaido, Anoka and Kahayo were next to them, and at the other side was a young man with white hair and sharp teeth. He wore a black sleeveless shirt and light purple pants. He also kept a short sword at his side. Jiraiya guessed this man was probably a Hozuki based on his appearance. Jiraiya then sat in front of them and said, "Well, what a colorful cast of characters we've got here. A Hozuki, a Yuki, a Kagaya, the infamous Ao, an Uzumaki, a Terumi, and a Leaf Shinobi. Now that's something I never thought I would see." Mei then chuckled and said, "Yes, you could say we do make strange bedfellows." Jiraiya then chuckled and said, "Anyhow, let's get down to business. Why have your people dragged me down here?" Mei responded, "Yes, well, as you may have known, we have been in a civil war in this village. However, what you may not know, we are in a stalemate as our navy controls the sea. We were trying to starve them out while slowly taking Yagura out. However, we came up with a problem. Yagura appears to be getting supplies and support from an old friend of yours, Orochimaru." Jiraiya now very seriously responded, "Are you sure about this?" Mei then responded, "Yes, as the Sound Village appears to have taken up residence on an island fortress and many associates of Orochimaru have been spotted there." Jiraiya sighed and said, So what are you proposing here? Mei then smiled and said, an informal alliance. You will support us and we will help you limit any influence of Orochimaru, and to sweeten the deal we'll give you access to the whirlpools as that territory is currently under the mist sphere. Jiraiya responded, yeah, and what do you want the Leaf to do in this alliance? Mei responded, well, until the civil war ends we want your support including weapons and in extreme cases shinobi. Jiraiya then said, I can agree to this. Anyway, I should bring this to the Hokage. Jiraiya then went to leave, however then before he could exit the tent Tsunade spoke up and said, there is one thing we want before you can return to the Leaf. We want your assistance in a raid on the tower the Sound Village has occupied. This will prove you will stick to your word. Jiraiya then gave an annoyed sigh and said, ugh, fine. However, before we leave for this, I want to see what kind of shinobi I will be working with. Will this be okay with you? Tsunade responded, yes, that will be allowed. However, for the time being Kimimaro will be with me. Kimimaro began to panic a bit on the prospect of being with this man he didn't completely trust. Jiraiya then waved his hand and said, yeah, whatever. Just don't kill him. Jiraiya then thought to himself, well, at least we know they are smart, but if they can fulfill their end of the bargain is yet to be seen. Shin Uchiha. Shin, after arriving in Konoha, was only told two things. One was to stick with Hana and the second was to do what the Hokage told him until Jiraiya returned. He was now in the office of Hokage. The man was in a uniform similar to one that he had seen on a coat rack that Orochimaru had, except this was red and the man was much older and looked less terrifying. Hana was sitting next to him but was not being very cooperative. Hiruzen spoke to them saying, so from what I've been told, Shin, you were experimented on by Orochimaru, is that true? Shin immediately responded saying, yes, Lord Hokage. Practically my entire life I have been in his labs. I apologize, but I don't necessarily know much about the Sound Village. Hiruzen then sighed and said, an apology is unnecessary. I am just happy you are safe. Would it be okay if you would tell me what he did to you? However, if it is too painful, that is okay. Shin then said, and no, I can say, I was created from Hashirama cells, corpses of dead and Uchiha cells to attempt to make a person he could take over so that he could inherit those traits. Shin paused when he saw the terror on Hana's face at this. He began to think what she thought of him now before Hiruzen spoke up saying, Shin, are you here? Shin then said, why yes, Lord Hokage. Sorry for the pause. Hiruzen responded, no, it is quite okay. I know this might be hard to say, but is there anything else you know? Shin responded, not much, Lord Hokage, as I was to be disposed of as a failure before Lord Jiraiya saved me. Hana then spoke saying, well, for me, I don't have much as I have a Kekii Genkai that Orochimaru was after, but I guess I was just lucky. Hiruzen then asked her, what is your Kekii Genkai? Hana responded saying, boil release, although I'm not too good at it. Hiruzen walked up to them and said, that is quite okay. I want you two to know you may stay as long as you wish here. I won't force you to do anything, but I will do what I can for you. They then got up, and as they left the building, Shin pondered his words, thinking what it really meant to be free, as he had no idea what to do now. Naruto, Land of Fire. Naruto walked down one of the main streets in the village looking for Anko. From what Zetsu had told him, she was not working, she would go to the dango shop, and he decided this may be his chance to get her to train him. As Naruto walked towards the shop, his thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. Sasuke. Sasuke asked him, Naruto, what are you doing here? Naruto responded saying, what, am I not allowed to be here now? Sasuke then said, well, no, but I can see you are definitely up to something, now tell me. Naruto then heard a voice behind him saying, yeah, tell us now. Naruto was surprised by this jump and saw it was Anko, who clearly knew what he was doing. Anko then said, well, it's clear you are doing something now. Spill it, or will I have to make you? Anko then brandished a kunai. Naruto, both surprised by this and at a loss for words, was honest and said, well, I was told you are very strong and thought maybe you could help me become stronger. Anko laughed and said, well, a good amount of flattery can go pretty far with me, but if you want my help you will need to do a bit more than that. Anko then grabbed Naruto and Sasuke by the back of their shirts and dragged them. When she finally stopped, they were at a forest that was gated off. The forest had a gate around it and a chain lock which Anko easily opened. Anko then put them down and said, "All right, if you want my help, survive there for a whole night and then I will help you." Sasuke then tried to speak up, but she ignored him and shoved them in before closing the gate and said, "Don't worry, I'll come back tomorrow morning, it's just one night." Kimimaro, land of water. Kimimaro woke up on one of the ships being used by the rebels. The ship was a warship and Kimimaro guessed that it was likely the flagship. As Kimimaro walked to the front of the ship, he saw Jiraiya standing with Tsunade and Anoka as they looked over a map. Jiraiya saw Kimimaro walking up to them and said, "Good, you are up. Now let's go over the plan one more time before we get to Orochimaru's base." Tsunade then pointed to a tower on the map that was surrounded by patrol ships and fortifications. Tsunade said, "As the map shows, Orochimaru has created defenses for this base in case of an attack such as this. There are both naval boats that could slow down our forces and towers that have chains to prevent additional ships from getting in." Jiraiya then said, "So what is the plan to deal with this?" Anoka then said, "Well, to deal with the ships we brought this large force. Some of the smaller ships will run interference to keep his off of us." Jiraiya nodded and Anoka continued saying, "Additionally, I have a summoning jutsu that can deal with the towers." Jiraiya then asked, "What kind of summons?" Anoka responded, "Well, it's not exactly simple to explain, but a sea creature I can control as long as I can stay focused, which is what Tsunade will do." Tsunade then spoke saying, "This is where you come in, Lord Jiraiya. You will be leading the attack of the fortress. The most important thing here is getting to the lab, as there are rumors he holds a Jinchuriki and a few Kekkei Genkai users there." Jiraiya nodded and said, "I understand. When does the attack begin?" Senato responded, "Dawn tomorrow, as soon as they have a change of guard." Naruto Uzumaki, land of fire. Naruto created a fire as the night began. Sasuke just sat by it as the fire burned. He asked Naruto, "So what is the plan?" Naruto responded, "Why do you think it is my job to have a plan?" Sasuke responded, "Well, you got us into this mess, so it's your job." Naruto sighed and then said, "Well, I think we should find something to eat. There should be something to eat in this forest, and then one can keep watch while the other one sleeps. How does that sound?" Sasuke shrugged and said, "Yeah, that is okay, I guess." Sasuke then yawned and said, "Do you think anyone is looking for us?" Naruto responded, "Maybe. I don't think anyone is looking for me. Maybe you, but I would be shocked if me." Sasuke responded, "Why do you think that?" Naruto then said, "It's not exactly like we have families that are looking for us, but at least people here seem to like you and praise you. I don't think I've ever gotten that." The two of them then just sat there, as if to just think about what Naruto had just said, which after a few minutes was interrupted by the sounds of an animal that was walking nearby. Naruto then stood up and said, "I think that might be our dinner. I'll go get it." Naruto then ran deeper into the forest until the fire was barely able to be seen in the distance from him. Danzo route. Danzo had called his agents who had been stationed around the Leaf Village for a meeting in regards to recent developments. Danzo looked around the room and saw 30 of his agents had come, mostly his closest and oldest ones with a few new recruits. Those who didn't come were those who either had been given assignments that required no contact or those who were in critical situations so that they couldn't attend. Danzo got in front of the mass of his agents and slammed his cane to get their attention. Once he did so, they stared, awaiting instruction from him. Danzo spoke saying, "As some of you may be aware, there has been some development regarding the conflict in the Mist Village and the Nine Tails Jinchuriki." Danzo paused for a moment as he thought he had seen something. However, as he scanned, he realized it was likely nothing. Danzo then continued saying, "I believe that now we must, in regards to the Mist conflict, become more involved, and I will be sending some of you into the Mist to observe, and if deemed necessary, intervene. Additionally, with the Jinchuriki, I will be having one of you recruit someone who will be able to observe it without any suspicion being raised, as past agents have disappeared, and I believe this method will be better." Danzo then signaled them to be dismissed, and they did so. As Danzo went further into the root facility, he went into the inner sanctum. This section had been designed to emulate the many labs Orochimaru had used. One of his confidants reported to him saying, "Lord Danzo, our latest reports from Orochimaru have been received." Danzo then said, "Good. Now what do they say?" He nodded and then said, Orochimaru states that Jiraiya is closing in on a facility in the Land of Water, and if we have our agents assist with his evacuation of experiments, he is willing to share a portion of them with us, including Kekkei Genkai users. Danzo paused to consider this and responded saying, To our agents tell them we agree to this. He nodded and gave this to an agent to get this sent immediately. Danzo then asked, Is there more to report? The confidant then responded saying, There have been 2 who have entered the village. They, according to reports, come from Jiraiya. One who calls itself Shin claims to have been experimented on by Orochimaru, and the other Hana claims that she is from the sand and holds a Kekkei Genkai. To this news Danzo said, For the time being I want them constantly monitored, but do not engage with them until we know more. We may be able to use them. The confidant nodded and then said, Once again our attempts to figure out the occurrences in the Rain Village have been failures. Our limited findings say that there is no new information on Hanzo holding. Either he has completely closed off the village, or there has been a change in leadership in the village. Danzo thought on this. This is very strange behavior even for Hanzo. It seems impossible for him to fall, but stranger things have occurred. Danzo then said, Continue to monitor the situation further. The confidant nodded, finishing the report by saying, Our recent attempts to replicate the Hashirama cell experiments done by Orochimaru have been seeing more successes. The children appear to be surviving. The clones appear to be making it through. Now we must see if they can use it. Danzo smiled and stood. He walked towards the tube thinking, Finally some good news. The world is becoming more hostile. What we need is new senju. While these methods may by some be seen as unsavory, by some are necessary. Combining DNA stolen from Tsunade to create a clone and combining it with Hashirama cells may be what we needed. A new savior for the leaf. Danzo thought of this as he stared at the child growing in its tube. Zetsu, Land of Fire. Zetsu stared into the distance at the edge of the village. He had begun to think about recent events and his goal and orders. He thought of Madara's orders and what he really was meant to do. He thought of this child who now appeared to have placed all of its trust in him. Naruto, who seemed to not truly understand what his destiny was. This child who Madara appeared to now believe was important enough to interfere in his plan in a way that could ruin everything. Was this just sentimental of that long-gone brother that he had cared about so much? Additionally, Zetsu had begun to feel an attachment to this child that he was to care and train. He wasn't human, he knew that for sure, yet he had emotions that humans have, and he had begun to sleep and dream. Zetsu didn't need to. It was rare that he had felt tired or in need of it, but he had began doing it. He had also been having these strange dreams. They had not seemed too much like dreams, but more like a memory, but they weren't his, and he wanted to know why he had them. Zetsu thought this is something that he should investigate, wondering whose memories they were and why does he have them. Zetsu felt as if more and more in the world wasn't what he had thought it was. He knew he wasn't strong as many humans that existed in that world and must be able to match them and become stronger. He now felt he did know 2 things in this world. He wanted to understand more of what it meant to be human, and he wants to protect, train, and nurture Naruto. This is what he knew. Kimimaro, Land of Water. Kimimaro looked off of the edge of the boat, ready for battle, as the mist surrounding Orochimaru's base began to clear, and he saw it. Kimimaro saw as a large compound at the bottom of a mountain began to come into view. Additionally, he saw as 2 towers blocked their way in. Now they had gotten close enough that those in the tower could clearly see it. Anoka then ran to the front and summoned a large creature that began to attack the towers. After this, the ships began to make a beeline towards the hideout seaside entrance as the fortress began launching its own ships to attempt to stop them. To stop, the smaller ship began attacking to some success. As they got closer, the ship began getting damaged, and so they began moving faster until they crashed into the dock. As the shinobi began getting off the ship, Tsunade yelled, "Now this is it. Time is of the essence. Show no mercy. We have to get to the lab before they are able to get their people out." Before Kimimaro could try to join them, Jiraiya grabbed them and said, "That's not our job. We have to go deeper in this base." Jiraiya then began sprinting, and not until they were out of the way of battle did he put Kimimaro down. The 2 of them then began going down hallways which led deeper in the base. While this place had some differences to the bases that he had been in before, this one was very similar to other ones he had been in before. For most people these halls all looked the same, but if you had spent most of your time in these halls you could tell certain similarities. The deeper that you go, you could see differences such as the surroundings became less militaristic and more snake-like and scientific. The lights were a bit more dim and there usually were alarms around the corners, but appeared some of these had been removed in their rush to evacuate. The two of them were stopped by some sound shinobi who rushed to stop them. 3 of them came. The leader said, "Stop them. Hold them off until Lady Guren completes extracting the subjects." The 2 behind him nodded as the 3 charged at him and Jiraiya. Kimimaro heard Jiraiya mutter, "We don't have time for this." Jiraiya then got in front of Kimimaro and began doing hand signs and said, "Flame bullet." After he said that a large flame was launched from his mouth, and in the narrow hallway the 3 shinobi were unable to avoid the flame as it burned them to a crisp. After this they continued running down the hallway, and it became clear that they were heading the right way as dead bodies of those who were clearly failed experiments littered the hallways, and a few cells had bodies of those who died in experiments and hadn't had their bodies removed due to the rush. Seeing this, Jiraiya said, "Guess this is Orochimaru's work." Kimimaro nodded and said, "Orochimaru doesn't care for those who fail him, and their bodies are usually cremated once they are no longer useful to him." After he said this, he could tell that this had made Jiraiya saddened. Kimimaro knew the 2 of them had in the past been teammates, but Orochimaru hadn't seemed to speak of it, but it was clear that Jiraiya had cared deeply for Orochimaru, and now seeing this made him horrified. They stopped walking once there was a fork in the hallway, and Jiraiya said, "Do you know which way goes to the main lab?" Kimimaro shook his head and Jiraiya sighed and told Kimimaro, "I'll head down one and you'll take the other." Kimimaro nodded and Jiraiya headed down the left hallway and Kimimaro took the right. After a while of running, Kimimaro saw a large room with a shinobi his age. He had the Sound Village headband and had bandages and wore a poncho. The boy then said, "So the traitor has arrived, prepare to die." Sanaito, Orochimaru hideout in the land of water. Sanaito was fighting a battle of attrition. His small strike force was made up of hardened veterans who had spent the last few years fighting a guerrilla campaign against Yagura's tyranny. Now they faced less skilled shinobi, and this was a battle he knew he could win. He charged forward with his bone blade slashing through one and then another. It became more of a grind, and while he knew he could win this fight, he didn't have time to keep fighting it. Sanaito thought, "There are so many of them. Perhaps it is time to test if this technique will work." Sanaito then charged into the center of the fighting and examined to see where everybody was located and shouted, "Dance of the Seedling Fern." After saying this, countless bones surfaced from the earth. Most of them strike the sound shinobi, clearing the battlefield of most of them. After observing this clear sign of defeat, the remaining sound shinobi began to rout, fleeing inside the fortress. Sanaito then led a charge as they cut down the majority of them, and was able to enter the fortress as the doors weren't able to be closed because of the speed of their defeat at his hands. Sanaito led them through the doors, quickly overtaking their enemies. Sanaito led down one of the main doorways, which led to what led to a prison. As this happened, Sanaito heard the sound of cell doors opening up. Sanaito then looked up and saw a floor above them where there were rows of cells. When the people came out of the cells, Sanaito saw people who barely seemed human as they had deformed bodies and seemed to have things growing on them. Sanaito then looked up and saw one of the sound shinobi on a platform and said, "All right, vermin. If we win, you'll be free to go." Thought. So this is what Orochimaru does to those he has taken. Sanaito said, "All right, don't let them intimidate you. They are still human, and that means they can be killed." The sound shinobi then said, "Tell yourselves that, you fools. Lord Orochimaru's experiments are no mere humans and can't be killed by filth such as you." Sanaito, irritated by this, threw a bone at him. This hit him in the neck, killing the sound shinobi nearly immediately. After this, the experiments charged at Sanaito and his men. Sanaito then encouraged them, saying, "Hold firm. As long as you don't allow them to overwhelm us, we shall prevail." After this, the clash began. Casualties on both sides began to mount, as while they were poorly trained, they were still hard to take down. Sanaito fought with one with large arms which swung them around. Sanaito dodged until it had exhausted itself and left its neck open to being hit, which Sanaito took advantage of and striked until his bone went through it, killing it. Tsunade thought to himself, one down, many to go. Anoka, Orochimaru hideout in the land of water. Anoka looked over the battlefield from the top of one of the destroyed towers. She saw the battlefield and thought to herself, so this is it now, it is all down to Tsunade and Jiraiya now. We have Orochimaru completely surrounded. We just need to ensure they aren't able to escape and just slowly close to the noose around their neck, and this war will be one step closer to being won. Anoka then slowly went down the tower, trying to ignore the destruction this battle had caused. She was able to do that until she saw the bodies of the dead. Anoka, upon seeing them, began thinking to herself, why do they fight so hard for a man who clearly isn't going to help them? Orochimaru and Yagura are two similar people, just in it for their self-interest, not caring for how many will die in order for that to be done. Once she had made it to the bottom of the tower, she signaled for one of their ships to pick her up, quickly arrived and threw down the rope for her to get on board. Once she had gotten on the ship, she saw most of the crew had made it. Anoka said, "Good, most of you are still here. Hope the battle wasn't too hard for you guys." After she said that, the men laughed and one said to her, "Yeah, don't worry. Some of them might have been trained to use their ships, but none of them seemed to have the experience needed to really be a threat to any of us." Anoka smiled and said, "Good, then we need to get back to work. I have orders to send someone back as soon as the enemy fleet was neutralized. Can I count on one of you to do that?" A few of them came forward and they released one of the smaller ships and they headed out to complete their mission. Anoka then said, "All right, let's gather the other ships and prepare the blockade of this hellhole." The captain of the ship nodded and shouted at the men, "All right, you heard the commander, get to work." The men on the ship then rushed to their stations and began getting the massive ship moving. Anoka then sat on the main deck and thought, finally, there might be some light at the end of the tunnel that is this horrible war. Anoka then looked and saw as the ships began to unite. Casualties hadn't been too high on the other ships too. At least 80% of the ships had survived the battle, and luckily this was more than enough to carry out the blockade. Anoka looked at the crews of the many ships that now awaited her for orders. Anoka said, "All right, men. Now for the most part our work here is done, but that doesn't mean we have no work. I have sent a messenger back to command to help finish the job, but until they arrive I have been told to begin a blockade. For now I want the larger ships to hold the choke points so as not to allow them to escape. Also the smaller ships, I want you to hold the broadened points and be ready at a moment's notice to announce a breakout attempt or any reinforcements coming. Is that understood?" Upon hearing this, a cheer of support broke out as they got to work doing their new jobs. Shortly after this, Anoka saw one of the towers of Orochimaru's fortress was being taken by their men as the flag of the Sound Village was torn down and the rebel mist banner was put on. A banner of the mist symbol on a white background. Anoka smiled and said, "Good. Now I think we may finally end this." Tsunade, Orochimaru hideout in the land of water. Tsunade plunged his bone weapon into the chest of the final experiment before nearly collapsing. Tsunade looked around the room and saw the bodies of the experiments, and his comrades were covering the room. Tsunade counted his remaining comrades and saw that casualties on his side were about 50%. Tsunade then said to his men, "All right, those who are too wounded to go in return to the portside entrance for medical care. The rest of us will head to take the towers." Very few went back and Tsunade led his men onward, although he knew that this would likely be no easier than what had come before this. As they headed to the second floor, a unit of sound shinobi came to confront them. Tsunade and his men began a clash with them, although luckily they put up less of a fight than the experiments they faced earlier. Tsunade fought two at once. They poorly attempted to attack him with slashes that had very little strength behind it before Tsunade killed the both of them. Tsunade continued this, slashing one's legs before launching a killing blow on the neck. Tsunade made sure not to get lazy. He thought, it doesn't matter their skill level. If we get lazy, one mistake can ruin the entire plan. Fighting like this until the room had been completely emptied of the sound shinobi. Tsunade looked back, seeing they hadn't lost a man in this attack luckily, and so he tore down the door so that they could get into the next section of this fortress. As they entered the next room, Tsunade saw it was a flight of stairs, but this still would be a challenge as he saw there was more sound shinobi waiting to confront them. This situation was actually much harder as they were stuck in a bottleneck. While Tsunade's men were both superior and at this point more numerous than the sound shinobi, These advantages couldn't be brought to bear as they were on a narrow staircase which they could only use one at a time. The confident Sound Shinobi now taunted them as the leader said, "Surrender, you mistraitors, and I promise the majority of you will live." After he said that, Sanaido laughed, which angered him, yelling at Sanaido, "What's so funny? Do you think you can really win?" Sanaido then smiled and said, "In most scenarios you would be right, but you are facing the head of the Kagaya clan and we don't go easily." Sanaido then stabbed him and shoved him off the staircase to the deep bottom that no one could see. The Sound Shinobi then began their attack, and it went much like the first one. This was not an easy battle because of the narrow space. Sanaido didn't have much room to maneuver, but he used his space well, and his Kekiai Genkai protected him from any mortal wounds. Sanaido continued this until they made it to the roof. Even once there, they faced some more Sound Shinobi who pointlessly held onto this place. This battle was much easier though than any of their previous fights, as they were now so close to victory and fought viciously. They gave no mercy to these men whose evils they knew of did, and that they were all that stood between them and victory. Once all of the men were dead, Sanaido yelled, "Tear down the flag. We need to show that we have won the battle." Sanaido's men then smiled as they took part of this, and he could hear cheers as their flag was raised over this fortress of horrors. With their job over, Sanaido gave a sigh of relief knowing the battle was finally won. Kimimaro, Orochimaru hideout in the land of water. Kimimaro had been in enough of Orochimaru's hideouts to know what was beyond this room. Beyond this room was the lab. It was likely full of those that were yet to be experimented on. His job's completion was almost done, and all that stood in his way was this child. Kimimaro glared at him and held out one of his bone weapons threateningly and said, "Get out of the way, kid, or I will make you." The kid then said, "I am not any more of a kid than you are, you traitor. I am Dosu and I won't let you." After Dosu said this, Kimimaro sighed and said, "Very well. Just remember you asked for this." Kimimaro then threw 3 bones to impale Dosu, which the boy jumped up dodging. Dosu then revealed sound weapons which he used to launch an attack at Kimimaro. Surprised by this, Kimimaro barely had enough time to get out of the way. Kimimaro then ran towards Dosu to try to close the distance. Seeing what he was trying to do, Dosu shot a series of sound blasts at Kimimaro to attempt to stop this attack. For most, these attacks would have ended them, but Kimimaro wasn't normal. He has received training from 2 Sannin and was able to notice a pattern in Dosu's attacks and close the distance. Kimimaro then swung his bone into the sound weapon which was connected to Dosu's arm. Dosu screamed in pain when the attack landed and took advantage of them being so close and used his other weapon to strike a deadly blow on Kimimaro. Kimimaro hadn't expected this attack, and due to this had barely enough time to get a rib bone defense up that prevented this attack from being fatal. While this attack wasn't fatal, it still was a massive hit, launching Kimimaro across that room into the wall and causing him to start coughing up blood. Kimimaro thought to himself, "It appears that Orochimaru's sound weapons have been definitely upgraded since I last trained against them. I must neutralize them." Dosu saw the effects this had on Kimimaro, and as he tore off the now useless weapon on his right arm, said, "So traitor, now that you have seen my weapons, are you ready to surrender and beg for Lord Orochimaru's forgiveness?" Kimimaro then chuckled and said, "Unlikely. By the end of this you will wish you took my offer of surrender." Dosu's previous smile now morphed into a frown as the battle now continued. Kimimaro then decided to try a similar strategy to before as he charged to the other side of the room. This time when he went for the attack, Dosu jumped out of the way and attempted to hit Kimimaro with an explosive kunai, but Kimimaro too got out of the way of this possibly deadly attack. Once he landed, Dosu attempted to launch an attack from his sound device, which Kimimaro dodged but barely, as he could feel it in the wind where the attack would have it. Kimimaro then, realizing that the weapon was in a cooldown stage, went for another attack at Dosu, which destroyed this weapon much like the other one. Kimimaro then kicked Dosu to the ground and prepared to launch a fatal strike, but was prevented by a crystal that appeared to be coming from another room and now separated the two of them. This though was less of a problem for now, as Kimimaro now could get to the lab without trouble. Dosu, frustrated, yelled at Kimimaro saying, "You coward! You can't even finish me, you traitor. I'll kill you one day, I swear." Anoka, Orochimaru hideout in the land of water. Anoka looked into the distance and saw a small ship on the horizon. As she looked closer, she saw that it was the one that she had sent back. Anoka then yelled at her men saying, "Hey! Get ready to receive some men." After hearing this, her men got straight to work by maneuvering the ship closer and getting ready to bring their men aboard. Once they had made it, Anoka greeted them saying, "Good to see you back. So what is the news on your end?" The leader of the group sighed and said, "Well, there is good news and some bad news." Anoka, now worried, said, "Well, tell us. No need taking any longer than it needs to be." The man nodded and said, "Well, the Mizukage has sent over a fleet that should be here in the coming hours, but we found on our way back that the false Mizukage Yagura has sent a fleet. From what it seems, he has attempted to build up a fleet and sees this as his chance, so they are sending one over." Anoka began to think this over. So this could end poorly. If we have our fleet destroyed here, all that we have gained here could be destroyed. If Yagura is able to drag us into a pitched battle, and this could mean us losing and then them capturing the fortress and all of our men inside. Anoka thought over this and came to a plan. She said, "All right, men, signal the fleet commanders, we have to prepare." The men immediately got to work, and Anoka smiled as she thought, "This may end up being a big gamble, but what we can gain is too large." Once all of them had gathered together, she looked down at her men and declared, "All right, men. You have all fought hard this day, and none can be taken from that, and so I must ask you to help with one last battle. That false Mizukage Yagura has sent a fleet of what he has left at us, and they most definitely are able to match our numbers, but reinforcements are on the way. The Mizukage has the rest of the fleet on the way, and if we can hold off Yagura's minions, then we will be victorious. Who's willing to fight, you sea dogs?" Upon hearing this, she heard cheers of support from her men. Anoka smiled and said, "All right. We know where they are coming from, so we need to use our large ships to block off their entrance to the bay, and we will then begin boarding them. So who's ready to kill some bootlickers?" The men got to work on preparing for this final clash as the bay was blocked. She had the smaller ships off to the side with skeleton crews, as they were for the most part useless in this kind of battle where it was ship to ship and boarding, where it would come down to who had the better sailors, and from past experience she knew her sea wolves were far more dangerous than the raw recruits from the mainland which Yagura used. The fleet came into view, and she saw they were ships equal in size to her, and they seemed to be making a turn. As they closed in, Anoka signaled for her men to begin, and they chained Yagura's ships and began boarding. Clashes began with Anoka's men taking advantage early on. Anoka then joined the fight, slashing many of the enemy's men down. Anoka's focus was quickly taken when she saw a blade with lightning and knew exactly who was leading this attack. Amuri Ringo appeared. She laughed and said, "Of course the Uzumaki of the sea is here. Finally I can end you." Anoka laughed and said, "You're unlikely, you traitor." Anoka then took out her blade and began her clash with Amuri. They began facing off in a flurry of strikes which never lasted too long, and they additionally weren't able to strike the other's body. Amuri laughed, saying, "Not bad for a Uzumaki." Anoka responded, "Yeah, you too. You aren't too bad for being a traitor to your people." After this, Amuri attempted to launch a strike, but this was deflected by Anoka, who launched water at her. Amuri laughed, saying, "You idiot. You thought that you could defeat me with a jutsu as weak as that?" Anoka said, "Nope, just distract you." Anoka then landed a hit, slashing one of her legs, finally getting a hit in. After this, Amuri screamed in pain before giving a laugh and said, "Well, that was a surprise, but it takes more than one strike to take down a shinobi of the true Mist Village." Anoka smiled and thought to herself, "I don't need to defeat you. Just keep you occupied until my allies can triumph in this battle." Anoka then looked towards the fortress and hoped that they would be able to hold off their enemies until Orochimaru's shinobi could be defeated. Kimimaro, Orochimaru hideout in the Land of Water. Kimimaro walked down the hallways in the dark tunnels which led to the lab. Kimimaro began walking down the stairs, and as he saw the green lights that were on the walls of many of Orochimaru's labs, he knew that he was on the right track. He walked and saw that this lab looked completely intact, as it didn't look like a rushed evacuation had taken place. Kimimaro began looking through the drawers until he found what he was looking for, until he finally found it, a manifest. Kimimaro thought to himself, "We are so lucky that this is here. Now I can see what is supposed to be here." Kimimaro looked down the list and saw that while this lab may have been smaller than most labs, it was still had enough people. He then continued down the list and saw that while many of these people may already be lost, there are a few that can be saved, people who haven't been experimented on yet. Kimimaro looked further into the lab and saw there had been some taken but a good amount left. Kimimaro thought, so it appears that they were rushing to get anyone out. Our attack seems to have come at a good time. Kimimaro looked at the pods and saw that some were young but some were older. There were two older ones. One which looked to be an Uzumaki with the distinctive red hair and was labeled as so. Kimimaro then saw that there were two adults who were labeled to be of the Yuki clan and one labeled of Boil Release. Kimimaro then saw that a few of them were clearly taken, 5 in all. Kimimaro was saddened by this, as to a degree he felt as if he was guilty. Every day that they had delayed this battle was a day they were able to take people and fewer people were saved. Kimimaro comforted himself thinking, at the very least these people are saved from this horrific fate. Hanako, Orochimaru hideout in the land of water. Hanako continued clashing on the ship. Around her, Hanako saw that neither side had truly gained much ground, which was fine with her. Amuri laughed and Hanako yelled, "What's so funny?" Amuri smiled and said, "Well, you Uzumaki, no matter what side in this war you take, you lose. You Uzumaki clan aren't of the mist, and never will be. I have never met a mist shinobi that would accept you." From behind them, a bone weapon struck Amuri in the lower back. Sanaido had arrived. Sanado held a bone to fight her and said, "I accept her. Hanako has bled and fought for the Mist Village, and my people would accept her no matter what." As this happened, the fleet finally arrived as Yagura's fleet was encircled. Hanako saw from the deck of their flagship Ao leading them as they destroyed what remained of Yagura's strike force. Seeing this, Amuri surrendered, saying, "All right, I know when I am defeated." Hanako smiled as it felt like they truly won.